Everyone said I was the wrong choice. Not to my face, of course. Nobody ever says it to your face. They say it in the way they look at you. That half-second pause when you walk into a room. The polite smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. The way conversations stop just a little too suddenly when you get close enough to hear. I know that look. I grew up with it. Here's what I've always believed. Being wrong for something is just someone else's opinion dressed up as a fact. My mother told me I was wrong for college. Too scattered, too emotional, too much. 3 years later, I was graduating top of my program while she was sending me articles about secretarial courses, just as a backup. My last boss told me I was wrong for the senior editor position. Too young, too untested. 6 months later, I was fixing every mistake his golden candidate made, without the title, without the pay, and with a smile so frozen it could have doubled as an ice sculpture. I've been the wrong choice my whole life. And I survived every single one of those verdicts. But nothing, in 24 years of being underestimated, prepared me for the night a 6'2" man, with silver eyes and absolutely zero regard for my personal boundaries, looked at me across a crowded room and said 4 words that changed everything I thought I knew about the world, about myself, and about what I was capable of. You are my mate. I didn't know what that meant, not yet. I should have run. Honestly, looking back, I really should have just run. But here's the thing about Ethan Callaway, alpha of the Silver Ridge Pack, the man every newspaper in 3 counties called the most powerful shifter of his generation. He had this irritating habit of making you feel like running wasn't even a physical option. Like your own legs had already made a decision your brain was still voting on. And then there was Vivian Hartley. Beautiful, composed, silver-tongued Vivian. The woman everyone in Silver Ridge had spent the last 2 years quietly, politely assuming would be his Luna. The alpha's perfect counterpart. Raised in pack society, fluent in every tradition I'd never heard of, elegant in ways that made my best blazer feel like a Halloween costume. She was everything they expected. I was everything they didn't. And the moment Ethan said those words, every single person in that room, pack wolves, elders, his inner circle, turned and looked at me the way you look at a math problem where the answer doesn't make sense, like they were waiting for someone to find the error. I didn't know then what I know now. I didn't know about the old laws. I didn't know about the trial. I didn't know that becoming Luna wasn't a title you were handed. It was one you had to earn, in front of everyone who already thought you'd fail. I didn't know that Vivian was hiding something so much bigger than rivalry. And I absolutely did not know that in 30 days, I would do something no Luna in Silver Ridge's 300-year history had ever done. I didn't know any of it, standing there in that room, in the wrong dress, with the wrong background, being looked at in exactly the wrong way. All I knew was that Ethan Callaway hadn't looked away from me once. And somehow, terrifyingly, inexplicably, neither had I. Chapter 1. Let me be clear about one thing. I was not supposed to be at that party. I was supposed to be at home, on my couch, in the oversized university hoodie I'd owned since junior year, that had a small mustard stain on the left sleeve that I was absolutely never washing out, because at this point, it was basically a personality trait. I was supposed to be eating leftover pasta and watching the kind of documentary that makes you feel intellectually superior, without requiring you to think too hard. That was the plan. The plan did not involve Mia Reeves. Mia Reeves, my best friend since we were 7 years old, who had approximately zero respect for my carefully constructed Friday night routine, who had shown up at my door at 8:30 p.m. in a dress that cost more than my monthly grocery budget and said, and I'm quoting directly, "Sophia, I love you, but if you don't put on real pants in the next 10 minutes, I am going to personally fold you into this car." I want to note that she absolutely would have. She's done it before. So that's how I ended up standing in the marble foyer of the Callaway estate, which, for the record, looked less like a house and more like someone had taken a manor, a mountain lodge, and the concept of architectural intimidation, and blended them together into one structure, wearing a green dress I'd bought for a work event 2 years ago, that technically still fit, holding a glass of champagne I didn't ask for, wondering how quickly I could find the exit without being rude. Stop plotting your escape, Mia said without looking at me, smiling at someone across the room like she'd been attending parties in shifter territory her whole life. I'm not plotting anything, I said. You've checked the door 3 times in the last minute. I'm observing. I'm a naturally observant person. You're a naturally anxious person who is observing the door. Fair, that was fair. I should explain, because you might be wondering what a completely ordinary, non-supernatural human woman was doing at a party hosted by the alpha of the Silver Ridge Pack. The answer is, Mia's boyfriend Riley was a pack member, a peripheral one, human adjacent, as he called it, part of the outer circle that kept things like the estate grounds and event logistics running. The pack wasn't secret, exactly. Not anymore. The whole shifter community had been publicly acknowledged for going on 6 years now, since the disclosure, and most people had settled into a kind of cautious normalcy about it. You knew they existed. You didn't ask too many questions. You definitely didn't wander into their territory uninvited. Unless your best friend dragged you there, in which case you stood very politely near the champagne table and waited for a socially acceptable amount of time to pass. The party was, okay, I'll be honest, stunning. The kind of stunning that made you feel slightly underdressed even if you'd shown up in a ball gown. The main hall had these soaring ceilings with exposed timber beams, and someone had strung what looked like literally thousands of warm lights through them, so the whole space glowed amber and gold. The crowd was a mix. Pack members in the way you could always tell if you looked close enough. Something about how they moved, how they held themselves, like every room they entered was already theirs, and human guests who had the same slightly dazzled expression I was probably wearing. I was doing perfectly fine, actually. Holding my champagne, staying near the wall, definitely not making eye contact with anyone for long enough to invite conversation. And then the room changed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like the music stopped or the lights shifted. It was just a ripple, a change in the air pressure, almost like the moment before a storm when everything goes very still. I felt it before I understood it, this strange pull of attention, everyone in the room orienting themselves in the same direction without appearing to move. I looked up. He was standing at the top of the staircase. I'm not going to be dramatic about it. I'm going to be completely factual and objective and not at all dramatic. Ethan Calloway was, fine, I'm being a little dramatic, absurdly good-looking in the way that felt almost like a personal offense. Tall enough that he cleared the low chandelier without ducking, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, wearing a charcoal jacket that fit like it had been built specifically for his frame. But it wasn't any of that, not really, that made the room react the way it did. It was something else. Something in the way he stood, not performing authority, not announcing himself, just occupying the space at the top of those stairs like gravity worked slightly differently around him. Silver eyes. That was the thing I noticed when he reached the bottom of the stairs, and the crowd shifted to let him through. Silver eyes that swept the room in exactly the practiced, assessing way of someone who had learned to scan for threats before he could read. And then they landed on me. I looked away immediately, obviously, because I was a normal person who did not stare at people, even when people were looking at them, even when the eye contact felt like something had physically reached across the room and taken hold of something in your chest. Get it together, Sophia. Breathe, Mia murmured beside me. I'm breathing. You look like you forgot how. That's just my face. She made a sound that was not convincing as agreement. I spent the next 20 minutes being very deliberately interested in the architectural details of the far wall. The party hummed around me. Laughter, music low enough to talk over, the particular social electricity of a room full of people who all knew each other and were performing the comfortable version of knowing each other for an audience. I was fine. Everything was fine. I was going to have one more glass of champagne, tell Mia I'd waited an appropriate amount of time, and go home to my pasta. You're not Pac. The voice came from directly beside me, and I want to be very clear that I did not flinch. I startled. Those are different things. One is an involuntary physical response, and the other is a failure of composure. I turned. Ethan Calloway was standing close enough that I had to tilt my chin up to meet his eyes, which I resented immediately. I'm 5'5". It's fine. I've made my peace with it. But there's something uniquely annoying about having to look up at someone who is already making you feel slightly off balance. Observant, I said, because apparently that was what came out of my mouth. Something shifted at the corner of his expression, not quite a smile. An acknowledgement of a smile. Most people who aren't pack stay near the door, he said. You're near the champagne table. My priorities are in order. That almost smile again. You're with Riley's guest. I'm Mia's friend. She's Riley's guest. I'm technically a +1 of a +1, so I'm not even sure I'm legally here. This is my house, he said. I decide who's legally here. Right, yes, sorry. That was, Sophia, please. I'm Sophia Mercer. I work in publishing. I don't know why I said the legal thing. I'm going to stop talking now. He looked at me for a moment, a longer moment than was strictly comfortable. Don't, he said. I blinked. Don't? Stop talking? Most people don't talk to me like that. Like what? Awkwardly? Like they're not afraid of me. I considered that. Should I be? He studied me with those silver eyes, and something about it made my skin feel too warm, and my thoughts too slow. No, he said finally. Not you. And I had no idea what to do with that sentence, so I just stood there holding my champagne like it was a shield, while something shifted in the air between us. Something I couldn't name. Something that felt older than this room, older than this party, like a key finding a lock it didn't know it was made for. And Ethan Calloway went very, very still. Not freeze mid-sentence still. Not distracted by something across the room still. Predator still. The kind of still that has nothing to do with the absence of movement, and everything to do with absolute, focused, laser-targeted attention. Sophia Mercer, he said slowly, like he was hearing the name a different way. That's, yes, still me. His jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or the wolf version of it. Something instinctive and sure, and earth-shaking, in a way his face was working very hard not to show. I need you to understand, he said quietly, that what I'm about to say is not something I say lightly, or incorrectly, or by mistake. My champagne glass was suddenly very heavy. Okay. He met my eyes. Held them. You are my mate. The room didn't stop. The music didn't cut. No one turned to stare. Not yet. Not in that first second. But I felt it, like the floor had shifted 2 inches to the left. Like the world had rearranged itself while I was looking somewhere else, and left me standing on the new version of it without a map. I'm sorry, I said. Can you? I'm going to need you to say that again, because I think I misheard. You didn't mishear. I'm a human. Yes. You're an alpha. Yes. Those two things don't usually... No, he agreed. They don't. I looked at him. He looked back at me. And across the room, in my peripheral vision, I saw it. The ripple of awareness spreading through the crowd, heads turning, expressions shifting, people leaning toward each other with that specific body language of people recalibrating something they thought they already understood. And near the far window, framed in gold light, perfectly poised, Vivian Hartley met my eyes. She smiled at me. It was the most terrifying smile I had ever seen in my 24 years of life. Not cruel, not threatening, something worse. Knowing. Like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. Like she already knew something I didn't. 3 open questions I had no answers to, standing there in a room full of wolves who were all deciding, in real time, what I was worth. What, exactly, did mate mean for someone like me? Why was Vivian smiling like that? And where was the door? Chapter 2. Nobody prepared me for the morning after. Not the morning after in the dramatic sense. Nothing happened, let me be absolutely clear about that. Ethan Calloway was many things, but apparently presumptuous wasn't one of them. No, I mean the morning after in the sense of, you go home, you lie in bed staring at your ceiling for 4 hours. You eat cereal at 2 a.m., standing directly over the sink like a person who has completely abandoned the concept of self-respect. And then you wake up the next day, and the world looks the same but feels fundamentally different in a way you can't explain to anyone who wasn't there. Mia was there, and even she was struggling. So he just said it, she said. sitting across from me at my kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, looking at me with the expression of someone who had been handed a piece of furniture from IKEA with no instructions. Just like that. In front of everyone. In front of everyone, I confirmed. And then what? And then I said I need some air, and went and stood on the terrace for 11 minutes. You timed it? I was trying to regulate. Mia stared at me. And Ethan. He waited, outside the terrace doors. I could see his shadow the whole time through the glass, which was... I stopped. He just waited. She was quiet for a moment. Riley says the mate bond is real, she said carefully. Like, physically real. Not metaphorical. It's... I know what it is, I said. I looked it up at 1 a.m. Of course you did. Did you know there are 47 academic papers on the shifter-mate bond published since the disclosure? 47, I read 6 of them. In one night. I'm a fast reader. I work in publishing. Mia set her mug down slowly. Sophia, what are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? The one I'd been turning over since I got home, still in my green dress, sitting on the edge of my bed like a person who'd walked into a film halfway through and was desperately trying to catch up on the plot. What do you do when a man, a wolf, an alpha, the most powerful shifter in 3 counties, looks at you across a room and tells you that the universe has decided you belong together? When you're human and ordinary, and you edit manuscripts for a living, and your most impressive skill is catching a dangling modifier at 50 paces. What do you do when the word Luna suddenly has your name attached to it, even though you don't know what it means? Not really, not in the way that matters. I don't know yet, I said honestly. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I picked up because I have terrible instincts. Miss Mercer, the voice was female, crisp, the kind of crisp that suggested a very expensive education and a very low tolerance for imprecision. My name is Dorothy Calloway, Ethan's aunt. I'm calling because we need to meet. I looked at Mia. Mia mouthed, "Who is it?" I mouthed back, "Aunt." She made a face that I interpreted as, "Oh no." "I'm sure," I said. "When were you thinking?" "An hour," Dorothy Calloway said. "The estate. Don't be late." "And Miss Mercer?" A pause that felt carefully engineered. "Wear something appropriate." She hung up. I looked at my current outfit. The university hoodie. The mustard stain. Pajama pants with small clouds on them. "I need to borrow a blazer," I told Mia. Dorothy Calloway was 72 years old, 5 feet tall, and the single most intimidating person I had encountered in my entire life, including the time I accidentally made eye contact with a judge at a traffic hearing. She was sitting at the head of a long oak table in a room that smelled of old books and wood polish, wearing a wool blazer the color of slate, with the specific posture of someone who had never once slouched in 7 decades of living. Her hair was silver white and pulled back precisely. Her eyes, Calloway eyes, silver, I was beginning to understand this was a family trait, assessed me from across the room with the kind of calm thoroughness that made me feel like a document being proofread. There were 2 other people in the room. One was a man I didn't recognize, broad-shouldered, late 40s, who introduced himself as Thomas Hargrove, the PAC's legal counsel. The other was a woman in her 60s, named Elizabeth Voss, who was apparently the PAC's head elder, a title I was going to need explained to me. Ethan was there too. Sitting to Dorothy's left, not at the head of the table, that was hers, clearly, and not up for discussion, with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, looking like he'd slept about as well as I had. He met my eyes when I sat down. Something in his expression shifted, barely perceptible, like a held breath releasing. "You came," he said quietly. "You had your aunt call me," I said. It felt rude not to. Dorothy made a sound that might have been approval. "Good. She's direct. That'll matter." "It will matter for what?" I asked, because apparently I had decided to just be direct since it was apparently appreciated. Dorothy folded her hands on the table. "Are you aware of the tradition of the Luna trial, Miss Mercer?" I'm aware that the word trial in any sentence involving a legal counsel makes me want to ask for a glass of water. Thomas Hargrove pushed a glass toward me without being asked. I decided I liked him. "The Luna trial," Elizabeth Voss said, with the measured tone of someone reciting something old and important. is a tradition that predates written pack law. When an alpha identifies a mate who has not been raised within pack culture, who does not hold an established position in the hierarchy, the pack has the right to invoke the trial. It is a 30-day period during which the potential Luna must demonstrate her capacity to hold the role. I processed that. A 30-day, what? Audition? Approving, Dorothy said. It is not punitive, it is protective, of the pack. And if I don't prove? The room was quiet for a beat longer than comfortable. The bond is not broken, Ethan said. His voice was even, but something underneath it wasn't. But the pack would not be obligated to recognize you as Luna. You would be my mate, privately, without the title, without the authority, without... He stopped. Without the protection it provides, Dorothy finished for him. A Luna who is not recognized by the pack is vulnerable in ways I don't think you currently have the framework to understand. I thought about Vivienne's smile last night, that knowing, patient, waiting smile. I thought I was beginning to get the framework. Who invoked the trial? I asked. Another pause, slightly different quality this time. It was a formal request, Elizabeth said carefully, submitted this morning, by a member of the inner circle. Vivienne Hartley, I said. Not a question. Nobody confirmed it, nobody denied it, which was, in its own way, a very complete answer. I sat back in my chair, looked at the ceiling for a second, thought about my pasta, my couch, my documentary, thought about the mustard stain on my hoodie, thought about every person who had ever looked at me with that patient, polite, "You're the wrong choice" expression. Thought about Ethan Calloway standing outside a terrace door in the dark, not pushing, not demanding, just waiting. What does the trial involve? I asked. Elizabeth Voss slid a folder across the table. Inside was a document, actual paper, handwritten at the top in what looked like very old ink, printed below in clean modern type. I scanned it. 30 days, integration with pack life, attendance at formal pack events, participation in community decisions, assessment by the Elder Council at the end of the period. The criteria were listed in careful, measured language: leadership, composure, judgment, the capacity for pack loyalty, not supernatural ability, not alpha bloodline, not a lifetime of pack tradition, leadership, composure, judgment, loyalty. Those were human things. Those were things I'd spent my whole life practicing, without knowing I was practicing them, in every wrong choice situation, every room where I wasn't supposed to be, every job and opportunity where someone handed me the verdict before the evidence was in. I looked up at Dorothy Calloway. She was watching me with those silver eyes, and for the first time since I'd walked into this room, there was something in them that wasn't assessment. It looked almost like curiosity. "You've been the wrong choice before," she said quietly. "I can tell, you wear it differently from someone who hasn't been." "I wear it well," I said. "I've had practice." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the architectural suggestion of one. "Yes," she said. "I think you might." I closed the folder, looked at Ethan. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read, something careful and hoping and held back all at once, like a person who wanted something very much and had decided that wanting it was not a reason to ask for it. "If I do this," I said, "the 30 days, the trial, whatever comes after, I do it on my terms. I'm not performing a version of this role that someone else wrote. I'm not Vivienne Hartley, and I'm not trying to be. If the pack can't accept what I actually am, that's the answer they need, and I'd rather know it in 30 days than 30 years. The room held its breath. Dorothy Calloway unfolded her hands, picked up her pen, signed the bottom of a document I hadn't seen her produce. 30 days, Miss Mercer, she said. Don't waste them. I moved into the east wing of Calloway Estate 4 days later. My apartment wasn't going anywhere. I'd negotiated that immediately, because I was not a person who abandoned exit strategies, and I'd cleared a remote work arrangement with my editor, who had reacted to my explanation with a long silence followed by, "Sophia, I'm going to need you to send me everything in writing because I genuinely cannot tell if you're joking." I was not joking. The East Wing was Fine. If you considered beautiful, enormous, and aggressively intimidating to be synonyms for fine, my room had a window seat the size of my entire bedroom at home, and bookshelves built into the walls that were already filled with actual books. Real ones, not decorative. I'd checked, because I have a professional condition that makes me verify these things immediately. Ethan had shown me the wing himself. Quietly, without fanfare. He'd pointed out the library 2 doors down, with what I was beginning to recognize as deliberate casualness, the specific tone of someone who had done research and was pretending they hadn't. "You read," he said. Not a question either. "I edit," I said. "It's the same, but with more opinions." "The library has a lot of pack history in it, if you wanted context, for the trial. Are you assigning me homework?" "I'm offering resources." "That's very diplomatic." He looked at me. "I'm trying," he said simply. "I know this isn't. I know it's not what you planned." "My Friday nights never go the way I plan," I said. "I'm adaptable." He almost smiled. Almost. I was starting to think that was just his default setting, the near smile, the held-back version of whatever he actually felt, like he'd learned very young to keep the real thing in reserve. "Sophia," he said. "Ethan, you don't have to prove anything to me." "I know," I said. "I'm proving it to them." He nodded slowly, and I thought for a moment he was going to say something else, something that would crack the careful, considered surface of him just slightly, but instead he stepped back, hands in his pockets, and said, "Dinner is at 7. The inner circle. They'll want to meet you formally." "Great," I said. "I love nothing more than a formal introduction to people who have already decided what they think of me." This time, the almost smile became something real, brief and quickly contained, but real. I filed it away. Evidence. I dressed for dinner in the green dress again, because it was the nicest thing I had, and I was not going to perform a version of myself I couldn't afford to maintain. Turned to my reflection in the mirror, and said out loud to nobody, "Let's find out what no Luna has ever done." I didn't know yet what that was, but I had 29 days left to figure it out. And somewhere in this house, Vivian Hartley was already planning something. I could feel it, the way you feel weather coming. Not specific, not yet, but present. A pressure in the air. That smile. Why had she smiled like that? What did she already know? Chapter 3. Nobody tells you that the hardest part of walking into a room full of people who've already decided you don't belong isn't the hostility. It's the politeness. Hostility you can work with. Hostility is honest. You know exactly where you stand with someone who looks at you like you're a problem they need to solve. But politeness, the careful, measured, socially immaculate kind that Silver Ridge's inner circle had apparently been raised from birth to deploy, that's a different animal entirely. It smiles at you. It pulls out your chair. It asks about your work with what sounds like genuine interest and absolutely is not. I know this particular flavor of politeness. I grew up in it. I survived it in every conference room and editorial meeting and family dinner where I was technically welcome and functionally decorative. The difference was, this time, I wasn't decorative. I was the main event. The dining room at Callaway Estate was exactly the kind of space that makes you feel like your posture has been inadequate your entire life. Long, dark table, high-backed chairs, candelabras that were absolutely real silver and not ironic, windows overlooking the grounds where the last of the evening light was turning the trees gold and dark. 8 people, not counting me and Ethan. I cataloged them the way I catalog a new manuscript, quickly, looking for structure, trying to understand what the whole thing is about before I get lost in individual chapters. Dorothy Callaway, at Ethan's left, was already watching me with those assessing silver eyes. Elizabeth Voss, the head elder, was across from her, composed, careful, the human equivalent of a very old and very considered document. Thomas Hargrove, the legal counsel, gave me a small nod that felt genuinely encouraging, and I nearly thanked him out loud. And then there were the others. Levi Hargrove, Thomas's son, I gathered quickly. Same jaw, younger, with the easy physicality of someone who had grown up in pack life and never questioned whether he belonged anywhere. He was friendly in a way that felt real rather than performed. which immediately made me suspicious, because I've been burned by easy friendliness before. Camila Reyes, who handled PAC communications, sharp-eyed, precise, with the specific energy of someone who processes information faster than she lets on. She asked me about publishing within 30 seconds of sitting down, and then listened to my answer with an attention that felt almost forensic. Parker Webb, gender-neutral name. They introduced themselves with a quiet efficiency that told me they'd done it many times in rooms that required the clarification. Who managed PAC finances and looked approximately 12 years old, despite clearly being in their late 20s. And Morgan Ellis, who was introduced as Ethan's second-in-command, with a title that translated roughly to beta, and who looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately decode. Not hostile, not friendly, neutral in the particular way of someone reserving judgment on purpose, which I respected more than either alternative. Vivienne sat directly across from me. Of course she did. She was, I'm going to be objective about this, genuinely beautiful in the way that suggested it required very little effort, which is its own particular kind of unfair. Dark hair, perfect posture, wearing deep burgundy that made my green dress feel like I'd gotten dressed in a moving vehicle. She smiled at me when I sat down. The same smile as last night. Patient, knowing, waiting. Sophia, she said warmly, it's so wonderful to finally meet you properly. Finally, like she'd been expecting me. Like this was a meeting that had been scheduled. Vivienne, I said, matching her warmth exactly, and adding nothing to it. Likewise. Ethan's hand briefly touched the back of my chair as he sat beside me. Not my hand, not my shoulder. The chair. A small, deliberate thing. I noted it. Filed it. So, Levi said, with the cheerful disregard for social tension that I was rapidly identifying as his defining characteristic. Publishing. What does that actually mean day to day? Like, are you reading manuscripts on a beach somewhere, or is that just what movies say? Levi, Morgan said flatly. What? I'm curious. It's a genuine question. It's fine, I said, and it was, actually. Genuine curiosity I could work with. Mostly it means reading a lot of things that aren't finished yet, and figuring out what they're trying to be, finding the story underneath the story someone thought they were telling. Camila looked up from her water glass. That's an interesting way to describe it. It's the accurate way. Finding the story underneath the story, she repeated, like she was cataloging it. That's actually useful in PAC communications, more often than you'd think. People rarely say what they mean directly, I agreed. They say something adjacent to it, and hope you're paying attention. Something shifted almost imperceptibly around the table, not in a bad way, in the way of people recalibrating a first impression by a few degrees. Vivienne's smile stayed exactly the same. That was the tell, I realized. Everyone else's expressions moved, responded, adjusted. Vivienne's stayed fixed, not frozen, too controlled for frozen, maintained, like she'd decided in advance what her face was going to do this evening and had no intention of deviating. I was a manuscript editor. I knew what it looked like when someone was working very hard to control their own narrative. The soup arrived. Conversation distributed itself around the table in the natural way of people who ate together regularly. I listened more than I spoke, which is almost always the right call in a new room, and I paid attention to the texture of things, who deferred to whom, where the real alliances were, what the jokes revealed about the structure underneath. Morgan and Levi had the shorthand of people who'd known each other since childhood. Camila and Parker coordinated with the quiet efficiency of a long professional partnership. Dorothy watched everyone with the same calm attention she'd directed at me, including Ethan. Especially Ethan, I noticed, with something that looked like careful, ongoing assessment rather than affection. And Vivienne? Vivienne spoke to everyone, smoothly, warmly, remembered details, Parker's recent project, Levi's injured shoulder from a training session last week, Elizabeth's upcoming anniversary. She was the social infrastructure of this table, I realized. The connective tissue, the person everyone turned to when conversation needed redirecting. She was very, very good at it. And she watched me notice, and she let me, and she smiled. She wants me to understand how much I'm outmatched. That was the move. Not intimidation. She was too smart for that. She was showing me the shape of what I was being asked to replace. This is what I am. This is what you're not. This is what they'll compare you to every single day for 30 days. I picked up my soup spoon. Fine. Vivienne, I said pleasantly. How long have you been part of the inner circle? A small pause. Since I was 20, she said. My family has been aligned with the Callaway Pack for 3 generations. That's impressive. And you oversee? Pack culture, traditions, the ceremonial calendar. The warmth in her voice was perfect. The things that hold us together, the history. So you're the memory, I said. She tilted her head slightly. In a way, yes. That's essential, I said, meaning it, because it was true, and I wasn't in the business of pretending otherwise. Any institution that loses its memory loses its identity. The work you do is foundational. Something moved behind her eyes, not what she expected. She'd been braced for competition, I think, or deference. Not acknowledgement. Not genuine acknowledgement, offered without agenda. She recovered immediately. That's a generous way to see it. It's the accurate way, I said. Same words I'd used with Camila. Deliberate. Levi made a small sound that was almost a laugh, then disguised it as a cough when Morgan looked at him. Ethan, beside me, was very still in the way I was beginning to recognize. Not threat still, listening still. The specific stillness of someone paying absolute, focused attention while appearing to do nothing in particular. The main course arrived. The conversation shifted. I let it. Halfway through the meal, Dorothy set down her fork and looked at me directly in the way that announced she was about to say something the table would remember. I want to discuss, she said, the first formal pack event of the trial period. The table's energy adjusted. Even Vivian's smile flickered, once, and reset. The Founders' Gathering, Elizabeth said. 3 weeks from Saturday. What is it? I asked. It's the largest pack event of the year, Morgan said, and his neutral expression had shifted into something that was almost protective? Not of me. Of the event itself, maybe. Of the weight of it. The whole pack attends. Families, children, elders going back to the founding generation. It's not a formal ceremony exactly. It's the heart of us, Dorothy said simply. It's the event that means the most, which is why the Luna presides over it. I set my fork down carefully. Presides. Welcomes the pack. Acknowledges the elders by name. Leads the opening tradition. Dorothy looked at me steadily. It requires knowing the families, the history, the specific protocols that have been maintained for 300 years. 3 weeks, I said. 3 weeks, she confirmed. I looked down at my plate for 1 second. 1. Let myself feel the size of it. 300 years of tradition I knew nothing about. A pack full of people who were already deciding what I was. 3 weeks, 21 days. Then I looked up. I'll need access to the pack records, I said. Full access. Names, family histories, the ceremonial protocols in writing. And someone who can tell me when the written record misses something. When there's context that lives in the room rather than on paper. Dorothy raised an eyebrow. That's a specific request. I'm a specific person. A beat. Levi, Dorothy said, without looking away from me. You'll assist Miss Mercer with pack history. Levi blinked. Me? Why me? Because you know every family in this pack by first name, you have no political agenda, and you talk too much, which means she'll actually get information instead of carefully curated summaries. Dorothy picked up her fork again. Don't embarrass me. Levi looked at me, grinned. I'm actually really fun to work with. I'll let you know, I said. Across the table, Vivian had recovered her smile, but something in it was different now. The patience was the same. The waiting was the same. But underneath it, very briefly, there had been something else. Something that looked, and I knew this didn't make sense, I knew it, but I was a person who read subtext for a living, almost like relief. Not that I was failing, that I wasn't. Why? Why would Vivian Hartley, the woman who had invoked this trial, look almost relieved that I was rising to meet it? That was a question with no answer yet, which meant it was the most important one in the room. After dinner, I found the library. I hadn't been looking for it specifically. I was looking for the kitchen, actually, because I stress-eat crackers when I'm processing large amounts of new information, and I had an enormous amount of new information to process. But the library found me in the way that good libraries always do, which is by being exactly where you needed something to be. I stood in the doorway, floor to ceiling, old wood, the smell of paper and time, 300 years of pack history, in a room that was built to hold it. I walked to the nearest shelf and pulled a volume at random. The Founding of Silver Ridge, A Living Record, Volume 1. I opened it. The handwriting inside was old, not unreadable, but old, careful, deliberate. The handwriting of someone who understood they were writing something that needed to last. I sat down on the floor, back against the shelf, and started to read. I didn't hear Ethan until he set a plate of crackers down beside me. I looked up. He looked down at me. On the floor, shoes off, spine bent over a 300-year-old record, with that almost smile. Levi told me about the crackers, he said. He noticed at dinner. He's observant for someone who talks that much. He's observant because he talks that much. People tell him things. Ethan settled into the armchair nearest to me, which struck me as deliberate. Not the chair across the room, not standing, but close, present. What are you reading? The beginning, I said. I always start at the beginning. He was quiet for a moment. In the good way, the way of someone comfortable with silence rather than threatened by it. Sophia, he said eventually. Ethan. The Founders Gathering. Dorothy was right about what it means to the pack. But I want you to know. You don't have to soften it, I said. I know it's a lot. I'm not pretending it isn't. I wasn't going to soften it. A pause. I was going to say, I know what it costs to walk into a room that's already decided. I know it better than you might think. I looked up at him. There was something in his expression, briefly, carefully unguarded, something older than the room, older than the careful composure. The most powerful alpha of his generation, I said slowly. And still, he agreed quietly. The expectation is its own kind of cage. We sat with that for a moment, the library around us, 300 years of history on the shelves, the house quiet, except for the distant sound of the wind outside. Get some sleep, he said eventually, standing. You have 29 days. 28, I corrected. It's past midnight. He looked at me for a long moment. You've already started counting. I've already started, I said. There's a difference. He nodded, moved to leave, stopped at the doorway. The third shelf from the left, he said. Second row. There's a record the official history doesn't reference. It's about the Lunas. I turned to look at the shelf. All of them? I asked. All of them, he said. What they did, what they built, what the pack remembers about them long after the formal records stop. He left. I found the book in 30 seconds, sat back down on the floor, opened it. The first page said, "These are the women who held us together when everything else fell apart." I read until 3 a.m., and I still had no idea what no Luna had ever done, but I was starting to understand the shape of the space it needed to fill. Chapter 4. Everyone thought they knew why she'd invoked the trial. That was fine. Let them think it. Vivian Hartley had spent the better part of a decade learning that the most powerful position in any room was the one nobody was watching, and the most effective strategy was the one that looked, from the outside, exactly like something else. Let them think rivalry. Let them think jealousy. Let them think she was the woman scorned, the obvious choice displaced by cosmic inconvenience, doing the only thing her pride would allow. Pride had nothing to do with it. She sat at her desk in the East Annex, her office, technically, though the pack had never formalized it with a title, because formal titles for what Vivian did would have required acknowledging how much of the pack's functioning depended on her, which was a conversation nobody wanted to have, and looked at the file she'd been looking at for 3 weeks. Before the party, before Sophia Mercer, before any of this became complicated in the ways it was now complicated. The file was not official. Nothing she was most careful about ever was. It was a collection of documents she'd assembled herself, over 18 months, with the specific patience of someone who understood that the truth rarely arrived complete. It came in pieces, at odd angles, through gaps in things that were supposed to be sealed. At the top of the file was a name. Not Sophia's, not Ethan's. Daniel Hargrove, Thomas's brother, Levi's uncle. A man who had left Silver Ridge Pack 12 years ago, under circumstances that the official record described as voluntary relocation, and that Vivienne had spent 18 months understanding were nothing of the sort. She closed the file. Not because she was done with it, because she'd memorized it, and looking at it further wasn't going to change what it said, and she had other things to do tonight. She had Sophia Mercer to think about. She'd known about the mate bond before Ethan did. That wasn't as remarkable as it sounded. Vivienne made it her business to understand the bond's mechanics better than most pack members, because pack culture was her domain, and the bond was the oldest piece of pack culture there was. She understood the signs, the way an unbonded alpha's energy shifted in the weeks before a mate recognition, the subtle changes in behavior, more restless, more attuned, moving through spaces differently, like a compass needle, responding to a pull it couldn't yet name. She'd watched it happen to Ethan for 2 months before the party, and she'd known, with the particular certainty of someone who had studied 3 centuries of pack history, that whoever it wasn't going to be her. It had never been going to be her. She wanted to be clear about this, at least in the privacy of her own mind, because she was scrupulously honest with herself, even when she was strategic with everyone else. She did not love Ethan Calloway. She respected him. She understood him, perhaps better than anyone in the pack, in the specific way of 2 people who have been performing adjacent roles for long enough to see each other's machinery. There was warmth there. There was trust. There was not love. There had never been love. What there had been was an arrangement, unspoken, unformalized, but understood by everyone in the inner circle, that had been enormously useful to both of them. Ethan's focus on the pack meant he had no time for the social architecture that kept the inner circle functional. Vivienne built and maintained that architecture. In return, she had access, influence, a position that no title could have given her as efficiently. She hadn't been planning to be displaced. She had been planning something considerably more complicated. The problem, the specific, urgent, currently running out of time problem, was this. Daniel Hargrove had not voluntarily relocated. Daniel Hargrove had been removed, quietly, efficiently, by a small group within the pack that had decided, 12 years ago, that certain things were better handled outside official channels. Things like a beta who'd discovered financial irregularities in pack accounts. Things like a man who had started asking questions about where money was going and why, and who had made the mistake of asking those questions in writing. He'd been given a choice. Leave quietly, or face a constructed disciplinary process that would have destroyed his standing and his family's reputation along with it. He'd left. He'd signed an agreement. He'd kept silent for 12 years. The people who'd made that choice were still in the pack. One of them sat on the Elder Council, and Vivienne had spent 18 months documenting all of it, piece by careful piece, because she had understood, long before Sophia Mercer walked into that party in a green dress, that the arrangement she'd built her position on was sitting on a foundation with a crack running through it. That eventually, something would shift. That when it did, the pack needed someone at the center of it who could hold things together without the whole structure coming down. She'd thought that person was going to be her. She was still not certain it wasn't. But Sophia Mercer had walked into that dining room tonight and done something Vivienne had not, in 18 months of careful planning, anticipated. She'd been real. Not performed, not strategic, not calculating the room and responding to what it wanted. She'd been genuinely, specifically, uncomplicatedly herself, direct in a way that wasn't aggression, warm in a way that wasn't performance, and sharp in a way that the inner circle wouldn't fully recognize until it was too late to be defensive about it. Finding the story underneath the story. Vivienne had written that down after dinner, in her personal notes, not the official ones. Because that was what the pack needed right now, more than ceremony or tradition or social architecture. They needed someone who could read a room that was lying to itself and find the truth underneath. The trial wasn't meant to break Sophia Mercer. It was meant to find out if she was what Vivienne needed her to be. And so far she was. There was a knock at her office door. "Come in," she said, already knowing who it was. Morgan Ellis closed the door behind him and stood in the way he always stood, economical, contained, like someone who had learned early that taking up too much space was a liability. She found the library, he said. Of course she did. Ethan brought her crackers. Vivian pressed her lips together against something that was almost a smile. Of course he did. Morgan was quiet for a moment, in the way of a man assembling words carefully. He was good at that, the careful assembly. It was why she trusted him, more than most. The Elder Council is going to push back on the Founders' Gathering assignment, he said. Hargrove, Thomas, is already worried it's too much, too fast. It's exactly the right amount, Vivian said. Too easy, and it proves nothing. Too hard, and it proves nothing useful. The Founders' Gathering is the right test. You designed the terms of the trial, Morgan said. Not an accusation, a confirmation. The terms of the trial are 300 years old. The application of those terms, the timeline, the specific events chosen, he met her eyes. You designed it. She held his gaze. Yes. Does Ethan know? Ethan knows that I invoked the trial. The rest is... Vivian. She was quiet. Does he know, Morgan said carefully, about Daniel Hargrove? The file on her desk. 18 months of careful, patient, dangerous work. No, she said. Not yet. When? When I'm certain she can hold the room when it comes out. Vivian looked at the file. Because it is coming out, Morgan. I've been holding this for 18 months and it cannot wait much longer. When Daniel's story breaks, and it will break, this pack is going to fracture along lines it doesn't even know exist yet. They're going to need a Luna who can stand in the middle of that fracture and hold both sides. Morgan was quiet for a long moment. And if she can't? Then I was wrong about her, Vivian said simply, and I handle it myself. That would cost you everything. Yes, she agreed. It would. Morgan looked at her, the particular look of someone who had known a person long enough to see behind the controlled surface, and who found what was there both admirable and slightly terrifying. You could have told someone, he said quietly. You've been carrying this alone for 18 months. If I'd told someone, it would have been managed, she said. Contained. Made to disappear the same way Daniel disappeared. That's not what it needs. She straightened. It needs to be witnessed, by the whole pack, by someone they already trust. They don't trust her yet. They will. She said it with the certainty of someone who had done the math. Give her 2 weeks. Morgan shook his head slowly. And if this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, then I'll have been wrong about everything, Vivian said. And at my age, that would be genuinely embarrassing. He almost laughed. Almost. The Hargrove files, he said. Are they safe? They're in 3 locations, and one of them isn't in this building. She paused. And Morgan? Thomas can't know I have them. Not yet. Levi's working with her now. I know. If Levi finds out before Thomas... Levi won't find out, she said. He'll be too busy telling Sophia everything he knows about every family in the pack. She paused, which is what I need him to do. Morgan looked at her for a long moment. You've been running this for 18 months, he said slowly. The whole thing, the documentation, waiting for the right moment. And then Sophia Mercer walks into a party and you realize she might be the person you needed. Yes. That's either very fortunate, he said, or very frightening. Most important things are both, she said. He nodded, moved to the door, stopped. She read the Book of Lunas tonight, he said. Ethan told her about it. Vivian looked up. Something moved in her expression, something genuine, something she didn't manage or maintain or design, something that had lived underneath everything else for a very long time. Good, she said quietly. Why good? Because the Book of Lunas was the only document in the entire Calloway library that told the truth about what the role had always actually been, underneath the ceremony and the titles and the 300-year-old protocols. The book that said, these are the women who held us together when everything else fell apart. The book that wasn't about power or tradition or being the right kind of person from the right kind of family. The book that was about what happened when everything broke and someone had to stand in the middle of it and refuse to let it stay broken. Because, Vivian said, she needs to know what she's actually being asked to do. Morgan left. Vivian sat alone in her office, the file on her desk, 18 months of careful, dangerous work, and looked at the name at the top. Daniel Hargrove. 3 weeks to the Founders' Gathering. 28 days for Sophia Mercer to become someone the pack would follow into a fracture. She looked at the ceiling. Please, she thought, in the specific direction of whatever force had decided to send a human publishing editor into the Silver Ridge Pack's most complicated year in a century. Please let me be right about her. Chapter 5. Here is what nobody tells you about learning 300 years of pack history in 3 weeks. It's not the volume that breaks you. I work in publishing. Volume is my natural habitat. I have read 600-page manuscripts in a weekend, caught continuity errors on page 412 that contradicted something established on page 17, and maintained a functional internal database of character names, world rules, and plot threads for approximately 40 simultaneous projects at any given time. Volume 1 can do. What nearly breaks you is the texture of it. The way pack history isn't linear, isn't a clean narrative with clear causation and tidy chapter breaks. It's layered. It's oral tradition written down by people who assumed the reader already knew things they didn't write. Because why would you write down what everyone already knows? It's ceremony, embedded inside history, embedded inside family memory, embedded inside 300 years of accumulated assumption. It's a manuscript that was never meant to be read by an outsider, which meant I was, functionally, the ideal person to read it. Because outsiders are exactly who you need when something has been looked at from the inside for so long that nobody can see it clearly anymore. I just needed Levi to fill in the gaps. Levi Hargrove, it turned out, was exactly what Dorothy had said he was. Politically agendas-free, constitutionally incapable of delivering a carefully curated summary, and in possession of more detailed knowledge about every family in Silver Ridge Pack than should reasonably fit inside one person. We'd established a rhythm by day 3. Library, 9 a.m. Levi arrived with coffee. He'd asked on day 1 how I took it and had never gotten it wrong since, which elevated him significantly in my estimation. I arrived with a list of questions generated from the previous night's reading, and we worked through them in whatever order the conversation naturally took us. He talked, I listened and cross-referenced. Occasionally I asked a question that made him stop mid-sentence and look at me like I'd said something in a language he didn't expect me to speak. How did you know to ask that? He said on day 4, after I'd asked about the relationship between the Voss family's founding role and their current elder council position. Because Elizabeth Voss referenced the founding charter in a way that suggested personal investment rather than professional familiarity, I said. And the charter gives the founding families specific veto rights that aren't mentioned anywhere in the modern governance documents, which either means those rights were formally retired, or they're just not being talked about. Levi stared at me. They're not being talked about, he said slowly. Right. How are you doing this? I read for a living, Levi. Text tells you things even when it's trying not to. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me with an expression I was getting familiar with. The expression of someone revising an assumption in real time. Can I ask you something? You ask me things constantly. That's literally what we're doing. Something personal. I looked up from my notes. Okay? Are you scared? I considered the question seriously, because it deserved a serious answer. Of the trial? Of all of it. The pack. The mate bond. Ethan. He paused. The way everyone is watching you. Yes, I said, obviously. He seemed surprised by the directness of it. You don't act scared. Acting scared doesn't help me learn 3 centuries of pack history in 3 weeks, I said. So I'm doing the thing and being scared simultaneously. It's called compartmentalization, and it's very efficient. Levi was quiet for a moment. Then, my dad doesn't think you're going to make it. I looked at him. Thomas, he clarified, like I might not have made the connection. He thinks the Founders' Gathering is too much. That Vivian set an impossible standard on purpose. He said it carefully, watching my face. He's been saying it to the inner circle. What do you think? I asked. I think, Levi said slowly, that Vivian doesn't do anything on purpose that doesn't have a reason behind it. And I don't know what the reason is, but I don't think it's to watch you fail." I filed that, added it to the growing stack of things about Vivian Hartley that didn't fit the obvious explanation. "Tell me about the Founders Gathering," I said. "Not the official version, the real version, what it actually feels like to be there." And Levi, who talked too much, who had no political agenda, who knew every family in the pack by first name, set down his coffee and told me. It took 3 hours. Not because the event was complicated, but because Levi explained it the way it lived in his memory, not as protocol, but as experience. The smell of the bonfire they lit at dusk, the way the eldest member of each founding family was welcomed by name before anyone else, in a specific order that hadn't changed in 140 years. The children who ran between the adults' legs while the formal opening happened, and how you were expected to acknowledge them too, not just the elders, because the pack's future walked alongside its past, and a Luna who only saw one was missing half the room. The opening toast, the specific words, the way silence fell across 300 people when the Luna spoke them, not because they were commanded to be silent, but because the words earned the silence, because they were the right words, said the right way, by the right person. "What if they're said by the wrong person?" I asked quietly. Levi looked at me. "The silence doesn't come," he said simply. "Everyone knows, and everyone remembers." I wrote that down, underlined it. "The words," I said. "The exact words." He recited them. I wrote them down. "Read them back." He corrected 2 syllables and 1 pause. "Why the pause?" I asked. "My grandmother said it's where you're supposed to feel it," he said. "Whatever you feel about the pack. About belonging to something. You're supposed to feel it in that pause and let it show, even a little." I looked at the words on the page. What do I feel about belonging to something? I'd spent most of my adult life being the wrong fit, the almost right candidate, the person who did the work of belonging without being granted the title of it. I'd built a kind of armor out of that, competent, self-sufficient, amused by my own outsider status in a way that kept the loneliness at a manageable distance. And then a silver-eyed alpha had looked across a room and said, "You are my mate," and I'd felt, underneath the shock and the panic and the complete disorientation, something I hadn't let myself name yet. Like a key finding a lock. Like a word I'd been looking for in a language I didn't know I was learning. What do I feel about belonging to something? More than I'd expected to. More than was safe to say out loud. 3 weeks into a 30-day trial with 17 open questions, and a pack full of people still deciding what I was worth. "Okay," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "What's next?" Day 9. Ethan found me in the library at 11 p.m. Again. I was beginning to think this was going to become a pattern, and I was beginning to not mind. "You haven't eaten since this afternoon," he said, setting a plate down beside me with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had already decided this was a reasonable thing to do, and saw no need to make it a discussion. "How do you know when I've eaten?" Morgan mentioned it. Morgan is tracking my meals? Morgan tracks everything. It's his defining characteristic. Ethan settled into the armchair. His armchair. I'd started thinking of it as his, which was a development I chose not to examine too closely. "What are you working on?" "The founding family trees," I said. "There are 6 of them, and they've been intermarrying for 300 years, so by this point, it's less a set of family trees, and more a very complicated hedge maze. Can I help?" I looked up. He was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, with the expression of someone offering something they weren't sure would be accepted. "You know the families," I said. "I grew up with them." "Then yes," I said. "Here." I slid the chart across the floor toward him. He came off the armchair and sat on the floor beside me without hesitating, which shouldn't have been notable and was notable anyway. The Alpha of Silver Ridge, cross-legged on a library floor at 11 p.m., studying a handmade family tree chart I'd constructed from pack records and Levi's narration. We worked for 2 hours. He knew things the records didn't. Not secrets, just texture. The Voss family's eldest daughter who'd married a Hargrove and spent 40 years quietly mediating between 2 families who hadn't agreed on anything since 1987. The Webb family's tradition of naming their firstborn after the founding generation, which was why there had been a Parker Webb in every generation for 160 years. The way the Ellis family, Morgan's family, had come to the pack not as founders but as refugees, 3 generations ago, and had built their loyalty into something that ran deeper than bloodline, because chosen belonging always does. "That's in the records," I said, when he told me, "about the Ellis family, but it's noted and moved past, like a footnote." "Because Morgan's grandfather asked for it to be," Ethan said. "He didn't want the family defined by where they'd come from." "But it defines how they belong," I said slowly. "It's the reason the Ellis family's loyalty is different from the founding families. It's chosen. That means something different." Ethan looked at me, long enough that I became aware of how close we were. Floor sitting close, paper spread between us close enough that I could see the specific shade of silver in his eyes that shifted when he was thinking hard about something. "Yes," he said quietly, "it does." We looked at each other for a moment too long. I looked back at the chart. "Tell me about your family," I said. "The Callaways. What's in the records isn't... It's very official. It reads like a legal document." "It was written by my great-grandfather," Ethan said. "He communicated exclusively in legal documents. It was a whole thing." I laughed. Actually laughed. Unexpected, genuine, the kind that catches you off guard. Ethan looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Open, surprised by itself. "He sounds fun," I said. "He was terrifying," Ethan said, "but fair." A pause. "Which is the best thing you can say about someone with that much authority, I think. That they were fair. Is that what you're trying to be?" He considered the question seriously. "Trying," he said. "It's harder than it sounds. Fair requires you to see things as they are, not as you need them to be. Most people in authority need things to be a certain way. The need gets in the way of the seeing." I thought about Thomas Hargrove, who needed me to fail because my failing confirmed something he'd already decided. I thought about the elder council member who had, according to Vivian's knowing expression, according to the gaps in the official record, according to a dozen small things that didn't add up, decided, 12 years ago, that certain things were better handled invisibly. "Ethan," I said carefully, "the pack finances. Who oversees them?" He went still, not threat still, alert still. "Parker, currently," he said. "Why?" "And historically?" A pause. "It's rotated. Different families, different periods." He looked at me. "Sophia, why are you asking about pack finances?" I thought about Vivian's file, about Daniel Hargrove, about 18 months of careful, patient, dangerous work that wasn't mine to reveal. "I'm not sure yet," I said honestly. "Something in the records doesn't add up. I'm probably misreading it." "You don't misread things." "I might misread things I don't have enough context for." He held my gaze. "If you find something," he said, "that doesn't add up, come to me." "I will," I said. I meant it. I just needed to understand it myself first. Day 14. Halfway. I stood at the window of my room at 6 a.m. and watched the grounds come alive in the early light. Pack members running the perimeter in their shifted forms, silver-gray shapes moving through the tree line with the fluid economy of something that had been doing this forever. 14 days in, 14 to go. I knew the founding families. I knew the ceremonial protocols. I knew the opening toast, the correct pause, the names of the elders in order of generation, the children who would be running between the adults' legs and needed to be seen. I knew things the official record didn't say. I still didn't know what No Luna had ever done. But I was beginning to feel, in the way you feel a story's shape before you can articulate it, that it wasn't something I was going to find in the records. It was something that was going to find me. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. I picked up. Again. Clearly I learned nothing. Miss Mercer. Male voice. Older. Careful in the specific way of someone choosing every word. "My name is Daniel Hargrove. I think it's time we spoke." The grounds below. The silver shapes in the tree line. 14 days. I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second. "Tell me where," I said. Chapter 6. Daniel Hargrove wanted to meet at a diner 40 minutes outside Silver Ridge territory. The kind of diner that exists in the specific geography of places people go when they don't want to be seen. Off a state highway, between two towns that aren't quite big enough to be destinations, with a parking lot full of trucks, and a menu that hadn't changed since 1994. The kind of place where nobody looks up when you walk in, because everyone there has their own reasons for being somewhere unremarkable. I told no one where I was going. I want to note that I understood, intellectually, that this was not the most strategically sound decision I had ever made. I was 14 days into a 30-day trial in a wolf shifter pack. I was driving 40 minutes outside pack territory to meet a man I'd never encountered before, who had obtained my personal phone number through means I hadn't established yet. And I was doing it without telling Ethan, or Levi, or even Mia, who would have at minimum insisted on coming with me and providing a running commentary on every decision I made, which honestly would have been useful. But Daniel Hargrove had called me, not Vivian, who had spent 18 months building a case around him, not Morgan, who knew things he wasn't saying, not Ethan, whose pack this was. Me. That was a choice, and choices like that have reasons behind them. I needed to understand the reason before I understood anything else. He was already there when I arrived. Late 60s, I estimated. The kind of face that had been handsome once and had settled into something more interesting, weathered, careful, with eyes that assessed the room the moment I walked in with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent 12 years being cautious. He was nursing a coffee he'd clearly had refilled twice. He'd been here a while. He stood when he saw me. Old-fashioned instinct, automatic. "Miss Mercer," he said. "Mr. Hargrove," I said, and sat down across from him. "How did you get my number?" "I have a contact," he said. "Inside the pack. Someone who thought it was time." I thought about that. Filed it. "Vivienne?" Something moved across his face. Surprise. And underneath it, something more complicated. "No," he said slowly. "Not Vivienne. Not Vivienne." Which meant someone else knew about Daniel Hargrove. Someone else had decided I was the right person to call. "How many people are running operations inside this pack?" "Okay," I said. "Tell me why I'm here." The waitress came. I ordered coffee I didn't need because it gave my hands something to do. Daniel watched her leave and then looked at me with the expression of a man who had rehearsed this conversation many times and was now discovering that the rehearsed version wasn't quite right. "You've been reading the pack records," he said. "Yes. The financial records. The historical accounts. Among other things. Did you find the gap?" I looked at him steadily. "Which one?" He exhaled. Something in his shoulders released. The specific release of a person who has been waiting to be understood by someone and has started to doubt it would happen. 12 years ago," he said, "I was the pack's financial administrator, a role I'd held for 8 years. I was good at it. I cared about it." A pause. "I found something. In the accounts. A pattern of transfers, small individually, significant in aggregate, that didn't correspond to any authorized expenditure I could find documentation for." "How much?" I asked. "Over the period I was able to trace, 7 years, approximately 400,000. I kept my face neutral. "What did you do?" "I documented it, as thoroughly as I could. And then I made the mistake of telling someone I trusted before I told the alpha." His jaw tightened. The alpha at the time was Ethan's father, William. He was a good man. I believe that. I believe he didn't know. But someone else did. "Someone else was running it," Daniel said. "And when I told my contact what I'd found, that contact told someone they shouldn't have. And within a week, I had 2 members of the Elder Council sitting in my office, telling me that my documentation was incomplete, my interpretation was incorrect, and that I had 2 choices: accept a formal censure for unauthorized investigation of PAC finances, or relocate voluntarily with a signed agreement not to discuss PAC internal matters." I thought about the Elder Council, about Elizabeth Voss, about the founding families and their 300-year-old veto rights that nobody talked about anymore. "Which Elder Council members?" I asked. "One of them has since died," he said. "Natural causes, 3 years ago. The other," he stopped, "is still on the council." I said. Still on the council, he confirmed. Still in the inner circle. Still, he looked out the window. Still there. The coffee arrived. I wrapped both hands around the mug. Mr. Hargrove, I said carefully. Why me? Why now? And why me specifically? He looked at me for a long moment. Because Vivian Hartley has been building a case for 18 months, he said. And she's the smartest person I know. And her case is thorough, and it's right. But Vivian has a position in that pack. History. Stakes. When she brings this forward, half the inner circle is going to believe she's doing it for reasons that have nothing to do with justice, because she's been standing next to the Alpha's chair for years, and everyone knows it. Her motives will be questioned. And mine won't, I said slowly. You have no history, he said, no agenda anyone can point to. You're 14 days into a trial. You have nothing to gain from this except, he paused, except doing the right thing, which is not nothing. It's not nothing, I agreed. There's more, he said. He reached into his jacket and produced a folder, slid it across the table. I opened it. Inside was documentation. Meticulous, careful, cross-referenced documentation, the kind that took patience and precision and a very specific understanding of how financial records worked. Some of it matched the gaps I'd found in the PAC records. Some of it went further than anything I'd identified. And at the bottom, a single page I hadn't expected. A name. The current Elder Council member. The one still there. Richard Voss. Elizabeth Voss's husband. Head Elder Elizabeth Voss, who sat in that meeting when I agreed to the trial. Who had recited the terms with measured, careful authority. Who had watched me with an expression I'd read as composed professionalism. Who was married to the man who had forced Daniel Hargrove out of his home and his pack and his life, and had been sitting on that secret for 12 years. I closed the folder, breathed. Does Elizabeth know? I asked. I don't know, Daniel said. I've asked myself that question for 12 years. I genuinely don't know. I sat with that for a moment, the weight of it. The specific, horrible weight of a question that didn't have a clean answer. Because if Elizabeth knew, she was complicit, and if she didn't, she was a woman about to find out something devastating about her husband in the most public possible way. Neither version was simple. Neither version was clean. What do you want from me? I asked directly. I want what's right, he said. I want what was taken from me acknowledged. I want my name, my family's name, cleared. He met my eyes. I want Levi to know the truth about his uncle. He was 8 years old when I left. He grew up being told I chose to go. Something tightened in my chest. He was 8 years old. Does your brother know? I asked. Thomas? Thomas knows I was pressured to leave, Daniel said. He doesn't know the full extent of it. He was told enough to keep him manageable, not enough to make him dangerous. He paused. He's been trying to protect me, I think, in his way, by believing it was less than it was. Thomas Hargrove, who sat in the inner circle meeting and told his son that Vivian had set an impossible standard. Thomas, who was worried about me failing, who had been carrying a partial truth for 12 years and building a life around the shape of it. Finding the story underneath the story. Okay, I said. Daniel looked at me. Okay. I need a week, I said. Don't contact anyone else. Don't reach out to Vivian directly. She'll move too fast if she knows I have this, and she needs to not move too fast. Can you give me a week? What are you going to do in a week? I'm going to read the rest of the records, I said. And I'm going to find every piece of this that exists in the official documentation, even the pieces that were buried. Because if I'm going to bring this forward, I'm going to bring it with everything, not a partial truth, the whole thing. He stared at me. That's, Miss Mercer, that's an enormous undertaking for one person in 1 week. I work in publishing, I said. I once reconstructed a 500-page manuscript's original outline from a final draft and 17 editorial emails. I'm fast, and I'm thorough, and I'm angry enough to be efficient. He blinked. Angry? You were 8 years old when he left, I said. Levi. And he's been carrying a story that wasn't true his whole life. I stood, left enough cash on the table for both coffees. That makes me angry. Anger is useful fuel, I picked up the folder. "One more thing," Daniel said. "Miss Mercer." I stopped. He looked at me with an expression that was complicated and tired, and something underneath both of those things that I thought might be hope, which is a fragile thing to carry for 12 years. "Why did you pick up the phone? When I called, you didn't know who I was." "I have terrible instincts," I said. He almost smiled. "Or very good ones," he said quietly. I drove back to the estate with the folder on the passenger seat, and my brain running at the specific high velocity it reaches when it's trying to hold too many things simultaneously and refusing to drop any of them. Richard Voss, Elder Counsel, 400,000 over 7 years. Daniel Hargrove, forced out at 40-something, missing 12 years of his nephew's life. Levi, who was 8 years old and grew up with a story that wasn't true. Thomas, carrying a partial truth like a wound he'd learned to walk around. Elizabeth, who might know or might not, and either way, was about to have her life fractured. Ethan, who didn't know any of it. Vivian, who knew most of it and had been waiting 18 months for the right moment. And me, 14 days into a trial, driving back to an estate with a folder full of evidence that could fracture a 300-year-old pack right down its oldest fault lines. What no Luna has ever done. I thought about the Book of Lunas. The women who held things together when everything fell apart. I'd read it twice now. Once that first night, once more carefully on day 6. It was full of crises, droughts, territorial disputes, families that stopped speaking, packs that split. And in every story, the Luna's role wasn't to prevent the fracture. It was to stand in the middle of it. To make people look at the break directly instead of around it. To hold the room while it hurt. That's what she's being asked to do. Vivian's words to Morgan, that I hadn't been in the room to hear but that I was beginning to understand anyway, the way you understand the shape of a thing from its shadow. I pulled into the estate drive and sat in the car for a moment. 7 days. I had 7 days before the founders' gathering to do 2 things simultaneously. Learn the rest of what I needed to learn to stand in front of 300 people and earn their silence. And find every buried piece of a 12-year-old injustice that a man on the Elder Council thought he'd made disappear. I was going to need more crackers. I was also, I realized, going to need to tell Ethan. Not everything. Not yet. Not until I had everything. But something. Enough. Because he'd said come to me, and I'd said I will, and I'd meant it. And whatever else this situation was, complicated, dangerous, loaded with more open questions than I'd ever managed simultaneously, I was not going to build trust with this man on a foundation of strategic omission. I'd been the recipient of too many partial truths to hand one to someone else. I got out of the car, went inside, found him in the study, standing at the window with a glass of water and the specific posture of someone who had been waiting without letting himself pace. He turned when I came in, looked at me, at the folder in my hand. "You left the territory," he said. Not an accusation, an observation, careful and held. "I did," I said. Morgan flagged it. Of course he had. "I told him not to follow you." I looked at him. "Why?" "Because you're not a prisoner," he said. "And because—" he stopped. "Because I trusted you to come back." Something in my chest did something I was going to have to deal with later. "Ethan," I said, "I need to tell you something. I don't have all of it yet. I need 7 more days to have all of it. But I can't walk around this building for 7 days knowing what I know and not telling you any of it." He set down the water glass, gave me his full attention in that way he had, total, focused, the room contracting to just this. "Tell me," he said. So I did. Not everything. The shape of it. Daniel Hargrove. The financial irregularities. The forced removal. The name I wasn't ready to say out loud yet, not until I had every piece, but the shape of where it pointed. He didn't interrupt, didn't pace. Stood very still in the way of someone absorbing something large and doing it deliberately, making space for it rather than reacting to it. When I finished, the room was quiet. 12 years, he said. Yes. My father's administration. Yes. I don't think he knew. No, Ethan said, and something in his voice was careful in a way that told me this landed differently than the other facts. This one was personal. This one touched something about the man who'd raised him, and the pack he'd inherited, and the version of the history he'd been given. No, he wouldn't have known. A pause. "The name," he said. "The elder council member. You know it." "I know it," I said. "I need 7 days to have it documented well enough that it can't be dismissed. If I say it now, without that—" "It gets managed," he said quietly. "Contained?" "Yes." He looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across his face. The controlled surface of him, shifting, not breaking, shifting, the way light changes on water. 7 days, he said. 7 days, I confirmed. He nodded, once, the nod of someone making a decision they intend to keep. "I'll stay out of it," he said, "until you're ready. But Sophia," he held my gaze, "when you're ready, come to me first." "First," I promised. He picked up his water glass, looked out the window at the dark grounds. "The Founders' Gathering," he said. "Are you ready for it?" "Ask me in 7 days," I said. The almost smile, real at the edges. 7 days, he said. I went back to the library. I had a folder, a promise, 7 days, and the growing, bone-deep certainty that the thing no Luna had ever done was not a ceremony, or a tradition, or a speech. It was something that was going to happen at the Founders' Gathering itself. Something that nobody was going to be ready for, including me. Chapter 7. Day 15. I made a map. Not metaphorically. An actual, physical, spread across the library floor map of everything I had. Index cards, different colors. Blue for documented fact. Yellow for documented gap. Something that should exist in the record and didn't. Red for cross-reference. A place where two sources touched each other in a way that was either coincidence or wasn't. By the end of day 15, the floor looked like a very complicated crime board. Levi walked in at 9 a.m., stopped in the doorway, and stared at it for a long moment. "I feel like I should be concerned," he said. "Hand me the 2003 financial summary," I said. "It's on the third shelf, blue binder." He got it without asking why, points to Levi. I'd told him nothing yet. Not about Daniel, not about Richard Voss, not about his uncle who had left when Levi was 8 years old, and the story he'd been given about why. I was going to have to tell him. Soon. Before the Founders' Gathering, because he deserved to know before it became public, and because walking into that event carrying a secret about his family, while pretending to help me learn his family's history, was not something I was willing to do to him. But not yet. Not until I had everything documented. Not until I could hand him the whole truth instead of a piece of it. He settled onto the floor beside me with the blue binder, looked at the index card map and said, "Can I ask what we're looking for?" "Patterns," I said, "in the financial records from 2003 to 2011. That's my dad's early tenure on the finance committee." I know. He was quiet for a moment. I watched him, carefully, from my peripheral vision, processing. Levi processed things faster than he let on, faster than his easy manner suggested. He'd been doing it all week, taking in what I asked and cross-referencing it against things he already knew, and occasionally going very quiet in the specific way of someone whose internal picture of something was shifting. "Sophia," he said slowly, "what did you find?" "I'm still finding it," I said. "When I have all of it, I'll tell you everything. I promise." He looked at me, long enough that I met his eyes. "Okay," he said, not happy about it, but trusting it. "Okay." He opened the blue binder. We worked. Day 16. The blue gaps became red cross-references. The pattern was elegant, in the way that financial crimes often are when you see them whole. Not flashy, not obvious, built for longevity rather than speed. Small transfers, consistently coded under a rotating series of authorized expenditure categories. Infrastructure maintenance, external consultancy, emergency reserves released and never replenished. Each individual transfer was defensible, explainable, the kind of thing a busy financial administrator would flag as unusual but not necessarily fraudulent, especially if the authorization signatures were in order. They were in order, impeccably. Richard Voss had been on the Elder Council's Finance Oversight Subcommittee for 22 years. He hadn't needed to forge anything, he'd needed only to ensure the right signatures were in the right places, and that the person most likely to look closely enough to see the pattern was removed before the pattern became visible. Daniel Hargrove had been that person. By day 16 I had documented, from PAC records alone, without Daniel's folder, cross-referencing only, a discrepancy of $312,000 across 9 years. Daniel's folder added the remainder, the years his own documentation covered before he was removed. 417,000. Total. I sat back on my heels and looked at the map. Okay, I said to nobody. Okay. Day 17. I needed the one thing the records couldn't give me. What had happened to the money after it left the PAC accounts? That wasn't in the library. That wasn't in anything I could access here. I sat at the library desk for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew who understood financial documentation better than I did. Parker, I said, when they picked up on the second ring. I need your help with something, and I need it to stay between us for 5 days. A pause. Does Ethan know you're asking me this? Parker said carefully. He knows the shape of what I'm investigating. He doesn't know I'm bringing you in yet. Another pause. Longer. What do you need? Parker said. Parker Webb, who managed PAC finances, who had introduced themselves with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd done it many times in rooms that required clarification, who I'd watched at the dinner table and assessed as brilliant, precise, and privately furious about something they were too professional to show. I was beginning to understand what they were privately furious about. I think you've already found some of this, I said carefully, in your own review of the accounts. The pause this time was the longest. How much have you documented? Parker said quietly. Enough, I said. Have you found more? Yes, Parker said. I found it 4 months ago. I didn't know what to do with it. The person responsible is still on the Elder Council, I said. Yes, a breath. I didn't know who to trust with it. Ethan. Ethan needed to know, but I didn't want to bring it to him without being certain, and being certain meant more time, and more time meant it kept. I know, I said. I know. Parker, can you document what you have? All of it. Format it so it's readable by someone who isn't a financial specialist. Like a pack full of people at a founders gathering? Parker said slowly. I stopped. What? I said. That's what you're planning, Parker said. Not a question. You're going to bring it there. At the gathering. In front of everyone. I hadn't said that. I hadn't even let myself think it that clearly. But, yes. The women who held things together when everything fell apart. The Luna who stood in the middle of the fracture. Who made people look at the break directly. Not a closed-room disclosure. Not a managed internal process that could be contained and shaped and quietly minimized by the people with the most to lose. Not a private conversation that became a rumor, that became a contested account that everyone argued about for years. A public reckoning, in front of the whole pack. At the event that was the heart of them, where it couldn't be managed, where it had to be witnessed. Parker, I said carefully, that's an enormous thing. It would upend the gathering completely. It would change what the event means for everyone there. Or it would change what it could mean, Parker said quietly. If it's done right. If the person who brings it is, they paused, is someone the pack has reason to trust. They don't trust me yet. They will, Parker said. Give them the speech first. The opening toast. Give them the reason to trust you. And then, a pause. And then, give them the truth. I pressed my hand flat on the desk. What no Luna has ever done. Not a ceremony, not a tradition, not a speech. A reckoning. In the room where the pack was most itself. Where the founding families sat alongside the children and the elders and the people whose loyalty was chosen rather than inherited. Where the silence, when it came, meant something. I need everything you have, I said, formatted clearly. By day 20. You'll have it by day 19, Parker said. I've been ready to give this to someone for 4 months. Parker, I said, why did you trust me with it? A pause. Because you asked about the financial records on day 9. they said. And you asked the right question, the one I'd been sitting with for months and hadn't heard anyone else ask. A beat. I've been watching you work. You don't perform competence. You just are competent. Quietly, without needing anyone to confirm it. I didn't know what to say to that. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet, Parker said. Thank me after the gathering. Day 19. Parker's documentation arrived in a sealed envelope slid under the library door at 6 a.m. I added it to the map. The map was now complete. I sat in the middle of it, index cards on 3 sides, the folder from Daniel, Parker's envelope, my own handwritten notes from 19 days of PAC records, and looked at the whole shape of it. $417,000. 9 years. One man who'd been removed to protect the secret. One man still on the Elder Council. A PAC that didn't know. A founding family whose elder position rested, in part, on a foundation of concealment. And Elizabeth Voss. I still didn't know about Elizabeth. I'd been turning that question over for 4 days and I still didn't have an answer, because the documentation couldn't tell me what a woman knew or didn't know about her husband's choices. The records showed Richard's name on authorization signatures. They showed nothing about Elizabeth. I needed to ask her. I knew that was the thing I'd been avoiding. I also knew I couldn't walk into the founders' gathering without doing it. I found her in the formal sitting room at 10 a.m., taking tea with the precision of someone for whom the ritual of it was important. She looked up when I came in, composed, careful, silver-haired and straight-spined, and gestured to the chair across from her without speaking. I sat. We looked at each other. "You've found something," she said, not a question. The head elder, who had watched everything for decades, reading a room the way she'd always read rooms. "Yes," I said. "About Richard." The room was very quiet. "Elizabeth," I said gently. "Did you know?" She set her teacup down. Precisely, in the center of the saucer. And then she did something I hadn't expected. She closed her eyes. Not the gesture of someone discovered, not shame, not calculation, not the scrambling energy of someone working out what to say. The gesture of someone who had been carrying something for a very long time and had just been given permission to put it down. "I found it 6 years ago," she said quietly, "in his personal files. I didn't understand all of it immediately. But when I understood what I was looking at," she stopped, opened her eyes. They were dry, but the effort of that was visible. I confronted him. He told me it had stopped, that there were circumstances, financial pressures, that he'd resolved, that it was over. "Did you believe him?" "I chose to believe him," she said, which was different. She knew it was different. The precision of her phrasing told me she'd been living with that distinction for 6 years. I chose to believe him, and I chose not to bring it forward, because she stopped again, because I am the head elder. Because the PAC's stability felt more important than a truth that could fracture it. Because I told myself the damage was done, and exposure would only cause more. "And Daniel Hargrove?" Her jaw tightened. "I didn't know about Daniel until 4 years ago. Not the full extent of it. When I learned what had been done, something moved across her face, real and painful. When it's nothing I can say about that adequately addresses it." "No," I agreed quietly. "There isn't." She looked at me. The assessment was different now, not the composed professional evaluation of the first meeting. Something rawer, more direct. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I'm going to bring it forward," I said. "At the founders' gathering, in front of the PAC." She was very still. "That will," she stopped. "Fracture things," I said. "Yes, I know." I leaned forward slightly. "Elizabeth, the PAC is already fractured. It's been fractured for 12 years, along a line nobody is looking at. The question isn't whether it breaks. The question is whether it breaks in private, where it can be managed and minimized and argued about forever, or in public, where it has to be witnessed and then actually healed." She looked at me for a long time. "You're going to stand in front of 300 people," she said slowly, "at the most important event of the PAC year, during your Luna trial, and disclose this. Yes, that could destroy your trial. I know. It could destroy your chances of the PAC accepting you as Luna." I know that too. Then why? Because it's right, I said simply. And because the pack deserves the truth more than I deserve the title. Elizabeth Voss looked at me. The head elder, who had watched Lunas for 40 years, who had sat on the elder council through 3 alpha successions, who had chosen the wrong thing 6 years ago for reasons she'd convinced herself were right, and had been living with that choice ever since. She reached out and picked up her teacup. I will stand with you, she said quietly. When you bring it forward, I will stand with you, and I will confirm what I know, whatever it costs me. Something in my chest did the same thing it had done when Ethan said I trusted you to come back. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, she said. I should have done this 6 years ago. This is not courage. This is very late correction. It still counts, I said. She almost smiled. Grief and relief in equal measure. Miss Mercer, she said. The opening toast at the gathering. Yes. Say it like you mean it, she said. Because you'll need them with you before you tell them the hard thing. You'll need them to feel, in that pause, that you are someone worth following into difficult territory. I know, I said. Do you feel it? She said. What the pause is for. Do you feel it yet? I thought about 19 days, the library floor, Levi's coffee every morning, Ethan bringing crackers in the dark, the Book of Lunas, and the women who held things together. The Ellis family's chosen loyalty running deeper than bloodline. The founding family's 300-year argument that was also a 300-year relationship. Levi at 8 years old, with a story that wasn't true. Daniel in a diner 40 minutes away, carrying 12 years of exile. What do I feel about belonging to something? Yes, I said. I feel it. Day 20. I told Levi. I sat him down in the library, closed the door, and told him everything. The documentation, the pattern. Daniel's forced removal. His uncle's 12 years of exile. What Daniel had said about Levi being 8 years old. What had been taken from both of them. I laid the index cards out in front of him as I talked. Blue, yellow, red. I told him the name. He sat very still through all of it. Not Ethan still, a different kind of still. The stillness of someone whose internal architecture is being rearranged around them while they try to stay upright. When I finished, the room was quiet. Levi looked at the index cards for a long moment. He didn't choose to go, he said finally. His voice was very level. No, I said. He didn't. He's been out there for 12 years and he didn't. He stopped. Jaw tight, eyes bright in a way he was working not to let become something else. He thought about me? He said that? He said he wanted you to know the truth, I said. That was the first thing he said about what he wanted. Not his name cleared, not the money, not the acknowledgement. You, knowing the truth. Levi pressed his hand flat on the table. My dad, he said. Does he know? Partially, I said. Not the full extent. He's going to, Levi stopped. When he finds out. At the gathering. In front of everyone. It's going to. I know, I said. Levi, if you need it not to be there. If you need me to find another way. No, he said. Immediately, firmly. No, you're right to do it there. My dad has been carrying a half-truth for 12 years, and making decisions from inside it. He needs the whole thing. Everyone needs the whole thing. He looked up at me. You're going to do this during your trial. This could cost you everything. Yeah, I said. I know. He looked at me for a long moment. Uncle Daniel called you, he said. A stranger, and you drove 40 minutes to a diner and you listened, and you spent a week documenting everything and you... He stopped. Why? Because someone needed to, I said. And I was the one who picked up the phone. Levi Hargrove, who talked too much and had no political agenda, and knew every family in the pack by first name, looked at me across the library table. Sophia, he said quietly, they're going to follow you, after this. Whatever happens with the trial, they're going to follow you. Because that's what this pack does with people who tell them the truth when it's hard. I looked at the index cards. The map, 20 days of work. One more day, I said, and then we find out. Chapter 8. Day 29. The night before the founders' gathering, I couldn't sleep. This was not surprising. I had never in my life been able to sleep the night before something enormous, and tomorrow was, by any reasonable metric, the most enormous thing I had ever walked toward voluntarily. I'd lain in the window seat for 2 hours watching the grounds, the dark tree line, the occasional silver shape moving at the perimeter, and eventually accepted that sleep was not happening and went to the library instead. I wasn't the only one awake. Ethan was there. Armchair. No book. Just sitting in the dark with a glass of water and the particular stillness of someone who had been thinking for a long time and hadn't finished yet. He looked up when I came in. Neither of us said anything for a moment. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "No," he agreed. I sat on the floor, my floor spot at this point. 29 days of library sessions had worn something like a groove in the space, not physically, but in the way of a place that has become associated with a particular kind of thinking, where your brain slips more easily into the right gear. "I know the full plan," Ethan said quietly. "Parker told me this afternoon." I looked up. "Parker." "Parker told me," he said, "because they felt I should know before tomorrow. Not to stop it, just to know." He paused. "I'm not angry. Are you worried?" "Enormously," he said. "But not about the plan. The plan is—" He stopped. "The plan is exactly right. It's the right thing to do in the right place. Someone should have found this years ago and I didn't. My father didn't." His jaw tightened briefly. "That's on the Callaway Alphas, as much as it's on Richard Voss." "It's on Richard Voss," I said firmly. "Your father was deceived. You inherited a concealment. That's not failure of leadership. That's what happens when someone decides to put their interests above the pack's, for long enough and carefully enough that the seams don't show." He looked at me. "You're very certain about that," he said. "I've spent 29 days reading 300 years of this pack's history," I said. "I know the difference between a leader who failed and a pack that was deceived. This is the second one." He was quiet for a moment. "Richard knows," he said, "that someone is close to the truth. He doesn't know it's you. Not yet. But Morgan flagged it this afternoon. He's been asking questions. Carefully. Through back channels." Something cold moved through me. "How much time do we have?" "Until tomorrow," Ethan said. "He won't move before the gathering." "Too obvious." "After." He paused. "After, it won't matter. Because it'll already be public." "Yes," I breathed. "Okay. Sophia." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The posture I'd come to associate with him saying something he'd been holding back. "What you're doing tomorrow, I need you to understand what it means. Beyond the trial. Beyond Richard Voss and the pack finances, and the reckoning." I waited. "In 300 years of Silver Ridge history," he said, "no Luna has ever stood in the Founders' Gathering and told the pack something it didn't want to hear. They've led, they've held, they've guided and mediated, and built things. But the Founders' Gathering has always been the one space that stays clean. Celebratory. Safe." "I know," I said. "I read the records." "You're going to change what it is," he said. "Forever. Even if everything goes right, even if the pack receives it the way it should, the gathering will never again be purely celebratory. There will always be a before and an after." I thought about that, let it land fully. "Is that wrong?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I don't think it is. I think the gathering has been a place the pack went to remember who they were. And maybe what they need is a place they go to reckon with who they've been. Those aren't the same thing, but they don't have to be opposites." "That's what I think," I said. "I know," he said. "I know it's what you think." Something in his expression shifted. "That's not why I'm telling you. I'm telling you because you need to know, walking in there tomorrow, that what you're doing is permanent. There's no version of this where you bring it forward and then it's like you didn't." "I know," I said. "And the trial?" "Ethan." I met his eyes. "If the pack decides I'm not their Luna because I told them the truth at the Founders' Gathering, then I'm not their Luna. That's a complete sentence. I'd rather know that now than find out in a year." He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "My mother," he said. "She died when I was 14. Pack fever. It's rare now, but it wasn't then, not in her generation. She was Luna for 11 years. He paused. The pack remembered her, not for the ceremonies, not for the formal events. They remembered her for the winter, when there was a territorial dispute with the Ridgeback pack, and half of Silver Ridge wanted to go to war, and she stood in the middle of the inner circle and refused to move until everyone sat down and talked. He looked at the middle distance. She said afterward, "I was young, I barely understood," she said. "A Luna's job isn't to keep the peace, it's to make the truth survivable." The library was very quiet. Make the truth survivable. That's in the Book of Lunas, I said softly, almost word for word. She wrote that entry herself, he said, 3 months before she died. I didn't say anything. Some things don't need a response. They need to be received, fully, and held. We sat in the quiet for a while. Ethan, I said eventually. Sophia. The mate bond, what does it... I stopped. Tried again. What does it feel like? For you. I've read the academic papers, and they're very thorough, and absolutely useless for actually understanding what it is. He almost smiled. All 47 of them? Only 6. I had other things to read. He looked at me, considering, the careful, held-back surface of him, and underneath it, something that had been building for 29 days of library sessions and crackers at midnight, and floor-sitting with family tree charts, and a trust established in pieces, each one placed deliberately. It feels, he said slowly, like a direction. Like, before, I moved through the world and made decisions based on what I could see and what I knew. And now, there's a direction, not a compulsion. I want to be clear about that. It doesn't override anything. It doesn't remove choice. It's more like, he paused, like knowing which way is north. You can still go any direction you want, but you always know where north is. I sat with that. And I'm north, I said. You're north, he confirmed, quiet, certain. I looked at my hands. The index card map, long since dismantled and organized into a proper document, was upstairs in my room. 29 days of work. Tomorrow's reckoning. I'm scared, I said. Not performing it, not managing it. Just saying it to the one person in this building I'd decided I could say it to, without it being a liability. I know, he said. I'm going to do it anyway. I know that too, he said. That's the part that's... He stopped, looked at me with something unguarded and real, and held at the edges by nothing at all. That's the part that's been north, Sophia. From the beginning. Not the green dress or the champagne table, or even the conversation. The part where you're scared, and you do it anyway. That's the thing. I felt the words land somewhere specific and stay there. Okay, I said softly. Okay, he agreed. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. The library around us. 300 years of history on the shelves and one night left before all of it shifted. You should sleep, I said eventually. You should sleep, he returned. I can't. Neither can I. Productive conversation, I said. That real smile, not the almost, the actual. It happens sometimes now, more than it used to, with decreasing effort to contain it. Tell me something, he said. From the records, something you found that surprised you. It was such a specific, deliberate kindness, giving me something to do with my brain that wasn't tomorrow, that I felt it like a physical thing. The 1887 drought, I said. The pack was in genuine crisis. Livestock dying, the river running low, 2 founding families in a territorial dispute about water rights that was about to turn violent. And the Luna at the time, Harriet Webb, Parker's ancestor, as it turns out, she didn't mediate the dispute. What did she do? She organized a work party, I said. Every family, including both disputing ones, assigned to dig an irrigation channel together. 6 weeks of hard physical labor. By the end of it, the dispute was resolved, not because anyone had won, but because you can't work alongside someone for 6 weeks in the heat and maintain the energy required to hate them. Ethan was quiet. That's not in the official record. It's in the Book of Lunas, I said. Harriet wrote it herself. She said, I did not solve the problem. I gave them something harder than the problem and let them solve each other. He looked at me. You've memorized the Book of Lunas, he said. I've read it 4 times, I said. I work in publishing. Repetition is how I know something is real. He shook his head slowly. Not dismissal. Something warmer than that. Go to sleep, Sophia, he said gently. You go to sleep. I'll go when you go. That's very stubborn of you. Alpha trait, he said. Documented across all 300 years. I laughed. Quietly, in the way of something genuine that doesn't need an audience. I stood, gathered myself for tomorrow the way you gather yourself, not by resolving the fear but by deciding to carry it into the room anyway. Ethan, I said at the doorway. He looked up. Whatever happens tomorrow, I said. Thank you. For the crackers, for the armchair, for... I stopped. For trusting me to come back. His expression did the thing it did now, the thing where it stopped performing composure, and just was what it was. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said. You've already... He stopped. The pack already has a Luna, Sophia. Whether the trial agrees or not. That's what's true. I held that sentence all the way back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed. Tomorrow, 300 people. The opening toast, the correct pause, the names of the elders in order, the children running between the adults' legs, the silence that had to be earned. And then, the thing no Luna had ever done. I lay back, closed my eyes, and thought about North. I woke at 5 a.m. without an alarm. Lay still for exactly 1 minute, taking inventory. Scared, yes. Ready. As ready as 29 days of impossible work could make anyone. Certain it was right, completely. I got up. Dressed carefully. Not the green dress. That was the dress of a person who didn't know what she was walking into. Today required something different. I'd bought it on day 10, on a lunch break with Mia, who had taken one look at what I was holding and said yes, absolutely, wear that. You look like someone who knows something everyone else is about to find out. Deep blue, simple. The kind of thing that doesn't ask for attention but holds it once it has it. I stood at the mirror. Make the truth survivable, I said to my reflection. Then I went downstairs. The estate was already beginning to stir. The gathering started at noon, and the preparation had been underway since before I woke. The grounds crew had been setting up since yesterday. The kitchen had been running since 4 a.m. The whole place had the particular charged energy of something large being assembled, the specific vibration of an event that mattered to the people building it. I found Dorothy Calloway in the morning room at 5:30, already dressed, already composed, already on her second cup of tea. She looked at me when I came in. I looked at her. Sit down, she said. I sat. She poured me tea without asking, set it in front of me. I know what you're planning, she said, for this afternoon. Does everyone know? I asked. Parker, Elizabeth, Morgan, Levi, Ethan, she said. And me. That's a tight circle for something this significant. It needed to be. Yes, she agreed. It did. She picked up her own cup. Richard came to see me last night. Late. He wanted to discuss. He called it concerns about the trial process. What he meant was he'd heard something was moving, and he wanted to find out what. I went still. What did you tell him? That the trial was proceeding exactly as designed, she said, which is the truth. She set down her cup. He's going to be in the front row at the gathering. His family position requires it. He'll be there when you speak. I absorbed that. Good, I said. Dorothy looked at me with those silver Calloway eyes. You're not going to give me a speech about courage, she observed. No. Good. I've heard enough speeches about courage to last several lifetimes. Courage is just what it looks like from the outside when someone is scared and does the thing anyway. That's exactly what it is, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Something in her expression that I'd been trying to read for 29 days, through every meeting and assessment and carefully held reaction. I owe you an honesty, she said. I waited. When Ethan first told me about the mate bond, she said. When he told me it was a human woman, a publishing editor with no pack ties and no supernatural ability and no history in our world, she paused. My first thought was that it was wrong. Not cruel, not impossible, just wrong. That the bond had somehow, that there was an error. I know, I said. I spent the first week of this trial looking for the error, she said, waiting to find the place where you would reveal yourself as inadequate. Not because I wished you ill, because I needed to know if my instinct was right. And, I said. My instinct was wrong, she said simply. And I am 72 years old, and I have been wrong before, and I will be wrong again, but I will tell you that I am wrong less often than almost anyone I know. So when I am wrong, it is significant, and I attend to it. She looked at me steadily. You are not the wrong choice, Sophia Mercer. You are the necessary one. There is a difference. Something in my chest that had been held tight for 29 days loosened, just slightly, just enough. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, she said. I was wrong about you for a week. That's not generosity. That's correction. She picked up her teacup. Now drink your tea. You have a gathering to preside over. I drank my tea. Outside, the grounds crew was setting up the bonfire that would be lit at dusk. The long tables were being arranged in the pattern that hadn't changed in 140 years. The founding family's banners were being hung in their specific order. Voss, Hargrove, Webb, Ellis, Calloway, and the sixth, the Reyes family, Camilla's family, whose banner was oldest and always hung first. 300 people, the heart of the pack, the event that meant the most. And me, standing in the middle of it. I thought about Harriet Webb and the irrigation channel, about Ethan's mother and the winter standoff, about every woman in that book who had stood in the middle of something broken and refused to look away from it. I thought about Daniel Hargrove in a diner 40 minutes away, who had spent 12 years in exile and called a stranger because he was out of other options. I thought about Levi at 8 years old. I finished my tea. Dorothy was already gone. She moved with the silent efficiency of someone who had been managing large events for decades and had no patience for lingering. The morning room was empty and quiet. I sat for one more moment. Then I stood up. Walked out. Noon was coming. Chapter 9. 312 people. I counted them the way I count words in a manuscript. Not obsessively, just automatically. The brain doing what it does when it needs to feel like it has a handle on the size of something. 312. Spread across the grounds in the long golden light of a late afternoon that had decided, apparently, to be beautiful on purpose. The bonfire was laid but not yet lit. The founding family banners moved in a light wind. The tables were full of food that the kitchen had been building since 4 a.m., and the smell of it, wood smoke and something warm and specific that Levi had told me was a spiced cider recipe that had been the gathering's signature since 1923, was the kind of smell that meant home to 300 people who hadn't asked me if it meant anything to me yet. It was starting to. That was the thing I hadn't expected. 29 days, and the place had gotten under my skin in the way that places do when you've spent enough time learning their history, not admiring it from a distance but actually inside it, understanding the texture, the weight, the human cost of every tradition and every silence and every name called in every specific order for 140 years. I stood just inside the tree line at the edge of the grounds, 3 minutes before noon, doing the thing that was not pacing. Levi appeared beside me. "You're pacing," he said. "I'm not pacing. I'm moving with purpose in a contained area. That's pacing." Levi. Sophia. I looked at him. He looked back at me. He was wearing the Hargrove family colors, deep green, the same shade that had been in the founding record for 300 years, and his easy manner was present, but underneath it, today, something tighter. Something that had been there since I'd told him about Daniel 4 days ago and hadn't fully left. "Is he here?" I asked quietly. Levi's jaw moved. "At the perimeter," he said. He hasn't been back on pack territory in 12 years. He didn't know if he was allowed. "He's allowed," I said. "This is his pack too." "I know that," Levi said. He stopped. "I haven't seen him since I was 8. I know. What do you even say to someone after 12 years? "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think probably the words matter less than showing up." He was quiet for a moment. "After," he said, "after you speak, can I?" "The moment it's done," I said. "Go find him." He nodded. "Once. the decisive nod of someone who has been waiting to do something for a long time and has finally been given the starting signal. "The Elder Order," he said, switching gears with the deliberate efficiency of someone who knew we both needed to focus. "You have it? By heart." The Webb family comes before the Ellis family, even though alphabetically, because the Webb family joined the pack 6 months before the Ellis family in the founding year, not because of alphabetical order. And if I call the Ellis family first, Morgan will notice, and even though he won't say anything, it will be the first thing he remembers about this, I said. "I know, Levi, I've got it." He exhaled. "Okay." "The children," I said. "The children," he confirmed. "Don't forget the children." "I won't forget the children." Some Lunas have forgotten the children. "I understand it's a sore point. I won't forget them." He almost smiled. The tight thing underneath his easy manner loosened, just slightly. "You're going to be good at this," he said. "Whatever happens with the trial, you're going to be really good at this." "Tell me that again in 2 hours," I said. He looked at me one more moment. Then he walked toward the gathering crowd, hands in his pockets, carrying 12 years of a story that was about to be corrected in front of everyone he'd ever known. I turned back to the grounds. Noon. I walked out of the tree line, and the gathering shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the pack was a body. I understood that now in a way I hadn't on day one. A single organism distributed across 300 people, and when something moved through it, you could feel it if you knew how to look. A ripple of awareness. The slight collective reorientation of 300 sets of attention. Toward me. I kept walking. Steady pace. The blue dress, the grounds, the long gold light. Past the first tables where children were already running exactly as Levi had predicted. Small, quick, paying zero attention to the formal proceedings, and everything attention to the cider and the food and each other. I looked at them. Acknowledged them. The way Levi had said, see them, not as a detail, but as the reason. One small girl, maybe 4 years old, red-haired and absolutely undeterred by the formality of the occasion, ran directly into my path and stopped, staring up at me with the frank assessment that only very small children can deploy without it being rude. I crouched down to her level. "Hi," I said. She studied me. "Are you the new Luna?" "I'm working on it," I said. She considered this. "My mum said you're human." "I am." "That's okay," she said, with the specific magnanimity of a 4-year-old conferring approval. "My best friend at nursery is human, and she's really good at sharing." "That's high praise," I said. "I'll try to live up to it." She nodded, satisfied, and ran off. I stood up. Around me, the ripple had changed quality, not just awareness now, something warmer, something that had been watching the exchange, and responded to it in the way of people recognizing something real. Good. Real was what I had to give them. It was the only thing I had. I found my position at the head of the gathering, the slight rise in the ground that served as the natural focal point, where the founding family banners were arranged in their order, and the bonfire waited to be lit. Elizabeth Voss was there, composed and pale and straight-spined, her husband Richard beside her in the front row of the elder seating. I didn't look at Richard, not yet. Dorothy Calloway was 2 rows back, watching me with those silver eyes. Morgan stood at the edge of the elder seating, neutral and present and knowing. Camila was near the media setup. Pack gatherings were documented internally, recorded for the archive. Parker was beside her, holding a folder I recognized. Ethan was where the Alpha stood for the gathering, not at the front, not presiding, but visible, present, the pack's anchor point. His eyes found mine across the crowd and held. North, I thought. Then I turned to face 300 people. The gathering sound, the low hum of conversation, the children's noise, the clink of cider cups, gradually, naturally, stilled. Not commanded, not hushed by anyone. The silence came because I was standing there, and the crowd recognized that this was the moment. That silence, even before I spoke, even before I earned it, that was a gift. The pack offering me the benefit of the doubt they hadn't decided to extend yet. I was not going to waste it. "I am going to do this in order," I said. My voice came out steady, clear. The grounds were good acoustics, Open air but shaped by the tree line into something that carried. Because order matters here. Because this pack has maintained its order for 300 years, and that continuity is not a small thing. I turned to the elder seating. Founding elders of Silver Ridge, I said. I see you. The formula, the exact words. Said not as performance, but as what they were. Acknowledgement. The real kind. The Reyes family. I looked at Camila's grandmother, 91 years old, silver-haired, sitting with the stillness of someone who had been at this event for 7 decades. First to raise the founding banner. Still here. Something moved across the old woman's face. Real recognition. The Webb family. Parker's grandfather, late 80s, Harriet Webb's great-great-grandchild, who carried the bloodline of the woman who'd built an irrigation channel to end a war. Builders, still building. The Hargrove family. I said it evenly. Steady. Thomas Hargrove, in the elder seating, with the careful expression of someone who had been watching me for 29 days and had not yet decided what he was watching. 300 years of stewardship, still here. I moved through the remaining families, the Ellis family, Morgan's family, chosen loyalty, deeper than bloodline, the Voss family. I looked at Elizabeth. She held my gaze, pale, straight-spined, carrying 6 years of a wrong choice into this moment, with the composure of someone who had decided that how she carried it was the last thing she could control. I said the Voss family acknowledgement. I said the Calloway name. And then I looked at the whole gathering, every face. The elders and the parents and the children who'd stopped running to watch, instinctively understanding that something was happening, even if they couldn't have named it. The pause. Levi's grandmother's instruction, feel it in that pause. Whatever you feel about the pack, about belonging to something. I felt it. 29 days of it. The library floor and the index cards and Daniel in the diner and the Book of Lunas and Ethan's crackers and the red-haired 4-year-old who'd told me that being human was okay because her best friend was human and was really good at sharing. Dorothy's correction. Elizabeth's too-late courage. Levi's 8-year-old self with a story that wasn't true. 300 years of people trying, imperfectly, to hold something together that was worth holding. The chosen loyalty that ran deeper than the inherited kind. I felt it, and I let it show. The way you let something show when you've decided the person in front of you has earned the real version. I said the opening toast. Every word, the correct pause. The silence that followed was the kind that earns its name. 312 people, not one of them moving, not one of them looking away. I had them. And now I had to break what I had, in order to build something that could hold more weight than what it was replacing. Before I light the bonfire, I said, I need to tell you something. The quality of the silence changed, not broken, deepened. I came to this pack 29 days ago, I said. I came knowing nothing about it. About its history, its families, its traditions. I have spent 29 days learning, reading, listening. I paused. And I found something in the reading that I cannot stand here, in front of you, and pretend I didn't find. The ripple moved through the crowd. The particular electric ripple of 300 people becoming alert simultaneously. Silver Ridge Pack is built on something real, I said. I know that now in a way I couldn't have known from the outside. The continuity, the loyalty, the way you show up for each other across generations. That is real, and it is extraordinary, and it deserves to be protected. I looked at the elder seating, which is why it cannot be protected by a concealment, even a very old, very careful, very well-maintained one. The silence was absolute. 12 years ago, I said, a man named Daniel Hargrove discovered a pattern of financial irregularities in the pack accounts. Transfers, coded under authorized categories, conducted over 9 years, totaling $417,000. When he documented what he found and began to investigate, he was not thanked. He was not heard. He was given a choice: leave quietly, or face a constructed process that would have destroyed his name and his family's reputation. I heard it move through the crowd, the sound of 300 people processing something unexpected. He left, I said. He signed an agreement. He kept his silence for 12 years. He missed 12 years of his family's life, 12 years of this pack's life, 12 years that were taken from him, not offered. I looked at Thomas Hargrove, He was very still, the kind of still that has nothing to do with composure and everything to do with a man whose world is being rearranged around him in real time. His nephew, I said, was 8 years old when he left, and has spent 12 years with a story that wasn't true. Levi, at the edge of the crowd, was looking at his father. Thomas had turned to look at his son. Something passed between them. The specific, private devastation of a family reckoning playing out inside a public one, too layered and too real for either of them to manage. The documentation I've assembled, I said, covers the full period, cross-referenced from PAC records, from Daniel Hargrove's personal files, and from an internal financial review conducted 4 months ago by our current financial administrator. Parker stepped forward, held up the folder, clear, present, deliberate. It names, I said, the person responsible for the transfers, the person responsible for Daniel Hargrove's removal, the person who has continued to sit on the elder council of this PAC for 12 years, while that removal stood uncorrected. The silence was so complete, I could hear the wind in the founding family banners. Richard Voss, I said. And the gathering erupted. Not into chaos. I want to be clear about that. Not chaos. The PAC was not a mob. It was a body, 300 people connected by something older and deeper than the event they were attending, and what moved through it in that moment was not rage or panic, but the specific, collective convulsion of something large being forced to adjust its understanding of itself. Voices, movement, the elder seating shifting, people standing, Richard Voss rising from his chair with an expression I'd never seen on a person before. Not guilt, not the caught and knowing expression of someone prepared for discovery, but something that looked, horribly, like relief. Like a man who had been waiting, somewhere underneath everything, to be found. Elizabeth Voss stood beside him. She did not look at her husband. She looked at me. And she stepped forward. "I need to speak," she said. Her voice was steady in the specific way of something being held steady by will alone. The crowd stilled. 6 years ago, Elizabeth said, I found evidence in my husband's personal files. I confronted him. I chose to believe that it had stopped. She did not look away from the crowd. From her PAC, I chose the stability of this institution over the truth that was owed to Daniel Hargrove and his family. That was wrong. It was wrong in a way that I have known every day for 6 years and chose, every day, not to correct. She paused. I am correcting it now, inadequately and too late. But I am correcting it. The gathering absorbed that. Morgan stepped forward to manage the elder seating. Richard Voss sat back down, not defiantly, not resisting, the posture of a man who had run out of road and knew it. Thomas Hargrove stood up. He was looking at Richard Voss with an expression that was the full, unmanaged, 12 years in the making version of everything he'd been carrying, the partial truth, the shape of what he'd half known and chosen not to pursue, the son he'd watched grow up with a missing uncle, and a story that didn't quite fit. My brother, Thomas said. His voice was not steady. He didn't try to make it steady. My brother has been outside this PAC for 12 years. He turned, looked toward the perimeter, and Daniel Hargrove walked out of the tree line. 12 years older, careful. Moving with the specific caution of a man who has been away from something and is not sure of his welcome. The crowd parted. Not dramatically, not performatively, just parted. The organic movement of a body making space for someone who belonged in it. Thomas Hargrove walked through the crowd toward his brother. They met in the middle of the gathering, in front of 300 people, and Thomas grabbed his brother by both arms and said something I was too far away to hear, and it didn't matter. It wasn't for me or for the crowd. It was for 12 years of distance, and a story that wasn't true. Levi was moving before I registered that he was moving, crossing the grounds at a pace just short of running. The 8-year-old who'd grown up with a missing uncle, and the 20-something who'd spent 4 days holding the truth before it was public. And when he reached Daniel Hargrove, he stopped. Daniel looked at him. Levi said something. Short. 1 sentence. Daniel's face did something that was not a small thing to watch. Levi pulled his uncle into a hug that was not brief and not composed, and was exactly what it needed to be. I looked away. Some things are private even in public. I looked at Ethan. He was looking at me across the gathering, across the controlled eruption of 300 people rearranging their understanding of their own history, with an expression that was completely unguarded for the first time since I'd known him. Not the almost smile, not the careful composure, not the held-back version of whatever he felt. Just what he felt. I looked away before I stopped functioning. The gathering was still moving, still processing, voices rising and falling, the elders in conference, Morgan managing the logistics of something that had no procedural precedent. Dorothy Calloway was standing near the front, watching everything with the assessment of someone tallying results. She met my eyes across the crowd, nodded, once. The briefest, most expensive nod I had ever received. I turned back to the bonfire, picked up the long match that had been placed there for the Luna to light it. "We're not done," I said. My voice carried. The crowd began to settle, not immediately, not fully, but enough. "We're not done here today. This is not the end of something. This is the beginning of a reckoning that this pack deserves to have fully and correctly and together." The settlement continued. 300 people, gradually, turning back toward me. "I am going to light this fire," I said. "Because the gathering is still the gathering. The founding families are still the founding families. The children are still running around, and they still need to eat the food that has been cooking since 4 a.m. A small, genuine ripple of sound through the crowd. Not quite laughter, but close, human, real. And tomorrow there will be a full pack meeting, where everything I've presented today will be addressed formally, with documentation, with the Elder Council, and with the transparency that Daniel Hargrove was owed 12 years ago. I struck the match. The bonfire caught. The flame moved up through the carefully laid wood with the certainty of something that had been waiting for exactly this. The light spread across the grounds, across 300 faces, across the founding family banners, and the long tables, and the children who had, as predicted, immediately gone back to running the moment the formal atmosphere shifted. I watched it burn. Make the truth survivable. I had done that. Or the beginning of it. The rest was going to take longer than one afternoon, was going to take the formal process, and the documentation, and the pack meeting, and whatever came next for Richard Voss, and for Elizabeth, and for Daniel, and for the Hargrove family, and for a pack that was going to have to look at a fracture it hadn't known was there, and decide, together, how to heal it. But the fire was lit, and the gathering was still the gathering. Camila appeared at my elbow. "The cider," she said quietly. "Do you want to do the serving tradition, or—" "Show me," I said. She showed me. I did it. 300 people, the bonfire behind me, the long gold light going amber as the afternoon moved toward evening. The red-haired 4-year-old found me again halfway through, pulled on my sleeve. "You did the fire," she said, with significant approval. "I did," I said. "Can I have more cider?" "Absolutely," I said, and poured it for her myself. She ran off, satisfied. I looked up at the sky. The first stars, early, faint. Somewhere behind me, Levi and Daniel Hargrove were sitting at a table together, and Levi was talking. Of course Levi was talking. And Daniel was listening, with the expression of a man hearing a language he thought he'd forgotten, and finding that he hadn't. Somewhere to my left, Thomas Hargrove and his brother were sitting apart from the crowd, not talking, just present with each other, the way you're present when words aren't adequate to the size of the thing. Somewhere Elizabeth Voss was standing with her pack, without her husband for the first time in 40 years of founders' gatherings, and she was standing straight. The fire burned. The gathering went on. It was Morgan who found me near the edge of the bonfire light as the evening deepened, when the crowd had softened into something less formal and more simply, together. "The Elder Council will meet tomorrow morning," he said. "Full session. The trial ruling will be issued after." "How long after?" "Hours, maybe less." He looked at the fire. "What you did today. Is it going to cost me the trial?" I asked directly. He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said honestly. "What you did today was not. There is no precedent for it. The Elder Council is going to have to decide whether what you did was an act of Luna leadership or an act that disrupted the sanctity of the gathering." "Both can be true," I said. "Yes," he agreed. "Both can be true. And that's exactly the question they'll be deciding. He paused. For what it's worth. Don't, I said gently. Don't tell me what it's worth yet. Wait until tomorrow. He nodded. I stood at the edge of the bonfire light, warm on one side and cool on the other, the gathering behind me and the dark tree line ahead. A hand came to rest, briefly, at the small of my back. Ethan, beside me, not saying anything. I didn't say anything either. We stood at the edge of the fire and watched the pack, his pack, and maybe mine, and the question of that was sitting in a council chamber and would have an answer by tomorrow. Move through the evening together. Whatever they decide, he said quietly. Whatever they decide, I agreed. The fire crackled. The stars came out fully. 300 people, or the beginning of 300 people finding their way back to each other, filled the grounds of an estate that had been standing for a very long time and would be standing after all of this was sorted. I was still scared. I was also still standing. Both at once. Efficient, as always. Chapter 10. The Elder Council met at 8 a.m. I knew this because Morgan told me at 7:59, appearing at the breakfast table with the expression of a man delivering information he felt I should have 30 seconds earlier than I received it. I appreciated the precision. I was eating toast I didn't taste and drinking coffee I needed, and trying to read a manuscript page I'd been staring at for 20 minutes without absorbing a single word, which was a new personal record for professional dysfunction. How long? I asked. As long as it takes, he said. Could be an hour, could be 3. Helpful, I said. Genuinely sorry, he said, and left. I put down the manuscript page. Outside the breakfast room window, the grounds were being cleared from yesterday, the long tables folded and stacked, the bonfire ash cold and gray in the morning light, the founding family banners taken down and folded with the specific care of things that were going back into storage until next year. The ordinary, procedural aftermath of something that had been extraordinary. The PAC meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., regardless of the trial ruling. That, at least, was settled. Thomas Hargrove had come to find me at 9 p.m. last night, after the gathering had wound down and the grounds had begun to empty, and stood in front of me with the expression of a man who had been taken apart and was putting himself back together in real time. The documentation, he'd said. The full documentation. I want to see it. You'll have it, I'd said. He'd looked at me for a long moment. My brother was right to call you, he said finally. I don't know how he knew, but he was right. I hadn't said anything to that. Some things don't need a response. Daniel was staying at the estate. Ethan had offered it, quietly, through Morgan, and Daniel had accepted with the specific, careful gratitude of a man who had spent 12 years not asking for things. He and Levi had talked until 2 in the morning. I knew this because I'd passed the sitting room at midnight on my way to the library, and heard Levi's voice, lower than usual. None of the easy chatter, something realer and slower, and had kept walking, because that conversation was not mine. Ethan had found me in the library again. Of course. We hadn't talked about the trial. We'd talked about the Harriet Webb irrigation channel, and about a 1923 territorial negotiation I'd found in the records, that had been resolved by an extraordinarily boring joint committee that met every Thursday for 8 months, until everyone was too tired of attending meetings to maintain the dispute. Ethan had laughed, actually laughed, the full version, the one he apparently kept in reserve for moments when he'd forgotten to contain it, and I had stored it in the part of my brain labeled things that are going to matter to me for a long time. We'd sat until 3 a.m. He had not said anything about what happened next. Neither had I. North was still north. That part wasn't up for discussion. The part that was up for discussion was currently happening in a council chamber somewhere in the East Wing, and there was nothing I could do about it, so I ate toast and waited. Vivian found me at 9:30. She knocked on the breakfast room door, which felt significant, given that she had been moving through this estate for years with the ease of someone who had never needed to knock, and came in when I said so, and sat down across from me with the particular composure of someone who had been waiting for a specific conversation for a long time. Yesterday, she said. Yesterday, I agreed. She looked at me steadily. I owe you an explanation. You don't owe me anything, I said. I figured most of it out. I know you did. A pause. That's part of what I owe you an explanation for. I built a situation and then watched you walk into it and used your walking into it for something I'd been planning for 18 months. That deserves acknowledgement. I looked at her. Vivienne Hartley, who had invoked the trial, who had designed its terms, who had spent 18 months building a case around a 12-year-old injustice, and then waited for the right person to bring it forward. You needed someone without history, I said, without a position anyone could question. Yes. And you found me. The bond found you, she said. I just recognized what you were when you walked into that room, what you could be. She paused. I want to be clear that I did not know, before the party, that Ethan's mate would be human. I didn't design this. I recognized an opportunity. You're very good at recognizing opportunities. Yes, she agreed, without apology. I am. I looked at her for a long moment. The 18 months, I said. You did that alone. Morgan helped, toward the end. But mostly alone. Yes. Why? I asked. Not why you did it. I understand why you did it. Why alone? Why not bring it to Ethan? She was quiet for a moment. Because Ethan would have acted immediately, she said. The moment he had enough to act, he would have moved. Directly, efficiently, and correctly. And Richard Voss would have faced a private disciplinary process, managed by the people with the most interest in managing it quietly. Daniel Hargrove would have received a settlement and a formal apology, and his name cleared in the records, and 3/4 of the pack would never have known it happened. And that wasn't enough, I said. It wasn't right, she said. There's a difference. The pack deserved to witness the correction, not as punishment, as an act of collective honesty. This pack prides itself on what it is. It needed to know what it had been. Those two things can coexist. They have to, or the pride is built on something hollow. I thought about what Ethan had said. The gathering will never again be purely celebratory. There will always be a before and an after. And what I'd said back, maybe what they need is a place they go to reckon with who they've been. You needed it to be public, I said. I needed it to be witnessed, she said. And I needed the person who brought it to be someone the pack would follow afterward, not someone they'd spend years relitigating the motives of. Someone with no history and no agenda, I said. Someone who had nothing to gain. Someone, Vivienne said carefully, who turned out to have considerably more than nothing to gain, but who did it anyway before she knew whether she'd gain anything at all. I met her eyes. You took a risk, I said. A very large one, on a person you'd known for 29 days. 29 days and one party, she said. And to be honest, I knew in the first 5 minutes of the party, when you stood near the champagne table and calculated the exit and still didn't leave. Something moved in her expression, the controlled surface of her, warmer underneath than I'd initially given credit for. People who calculate exits and don't take them are interesting to me. They're usually there because something matters to them more than comfort. Or because their best friend threatened to fold them into a car, I said. She almost smiled. A real one. Also possible. We sat for a moment, in the specific piece of two people who have been operating in parallel for a month, and are finally having the direct conversation. Vivienne, I said, whatever the council decides today, what you built, what you carried for 18 months, that was its own kind of leadership. She was quiet. Don't, she said, but not unkindly. I mean it. I know you do. She looked at the window. I should have found a way to do it that didn't require an unsuspecting publishing editor to walk into a shifter party and have her entire life rearranged. My life needed rearranging, I said. I just didn't know it yet. She looked back at me. Something in her expression that I hadn't seen before. Unguarded, genuine. The version of Vivienne Hartley that lived underneath the social architecture she'd built and maintained for years. I hope the council rules in your favor, she said. I want to be clear that I hope that. Whatever it looked like from the outside, whatever anyone thinks my motives were, I hope you get to stay. Thank you, I said. She nodded, stood, paused at the door. For what it's worth, she said, the pack will follow you regardless of the ruling. You earned that yesterday. The title is the council's to give or withhold, the trust, She paused. The trust is already given. That's not something a council can take back. She left. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I went to the library. I wasn't reading. I was sitting in the middle of the floor, back against the shelves, with the Book of Lunas open in my lap, not reading it but holding it, the way you hold something that has meant something to you when you need to remember what meaning feels like. Ethan found me there at 11 a.m. He looked at me on the floor, shoes off, book in lap, and didn't say anything about it. Sat in his armchair. The armchair. Ours, at this point, in the way that things become ours without a formal transfer of ownership. They're still deliberating, he said. I know. It could go either way, he said. I want you to know that I've told them, formally, on the record, that the Alpha's position is that what you did yesterday was an act of Luna leadership. That the trial was designed to assess capacity for leadership, and that yesterday was the clearest demonstration of that capacity the trial could have produced. He paused. But the council is independent. My position is on the record. Their ruling is their ruling. I know, I said. Whatever they decide. Ethan, I said. I know, whatever they decide. I looked up at him. I'm okay. You're sitting on the floor holding a book like it's a life vest. I'm okay, and I'm holding a book like a life vest, I said. Both things. He almost smiled. Both things. I looked back at the book. There's an entry in here, I said. From 1952, Luna Margaret Calloway. Your grandmother, I think. Or great-grandmother. Great-grandmother, he said. She writes about a pack vote that went wrong. A decision the pack made that she knew was the wrong one, and she couldn't stop it, and she had to watch the consequences unfold and hold the pack together through the aftermath of a choice she'd argued against. I looked at the page. She says, I learned that being right is not the same as being useful. Useful is what you are after the decision, when the people who made it need someone who isn't angry at them. Ethan was quiet. That's the job, I said, isn't it? That's what the book keeps saying, in different ways, across 300 years. It's not about being right. It's about being there after. Yes, he said, that's the job. I can do that job, I said. Not performed certainty. The real kind, the kind that comes from 29 days of understanding something from the inside, finding its shape, locating where you fit within it. I know, he said. I closed the book, looked at him. Can I ask you something? Yes. When this is over, the trial, the ruling, the pack meeting this afternoon, all of it, what do you want? Not the pack, not the bond, you. He looked at me for a long time. I want, he said carefully, to sit on this floor at 11 p.m. with someone who is reading about 300-year-old irrigation channels and laughing about them. I want to bring crackers to a person who forgets to eat when she's thinking too hard. I want, he stopped. I want North to be a place I can actually walk toward, instead of just knowing the direction of. My chest did the thing. That's very specific, I said. I'm a specific person, he said. I thought that was me. We can both be specific, he said. There's room. I looked at him, the unguarded version of him, the one that had been emerging in pieces over 29 days, a crack in the composure here, an actual laugh there, crackers at midnight. The armchair moved 2 feet closer to my floor spot without either of us acknowledging it. Okay, I said. Okay, he said. Okay, I confirmed. North. Both directions. Something in his expression shifted into something I didn't have a word for yet, but intended to learn. The ruling came at 12:47 p.m. Morgan appeared in the library doorway, looked at me on the floor, looked at Ethan in the armchair, made absolutely no comment about either. The Elder Council has issued its ruling, he said. I stood, closed the Book of Lunas, set it carefully on the shelf. And, I said. Morgan looked at me with the neutral expression of a man who had been reserving judgment for 29 days and had, somewhere in the last 20 hours, finished the process. The Elder Council, he said, finds that the actions taken by Sophia Mercer at the founders' gathering of Silver Ridge Pack constitute an act of Luna leadership of exceptional character, That the disruption caused to the ceremonial tradition of the gathering was justified by the magnitude of the truth disclosed and the manner of its disclosure, which prioritized the PAC's collective well-being over the candidate's personal advantage. He paused. The trial is ruled complete. The Elder Council recognizes Sophia Mercer as Luna of Silver Ridge PAC. The library was very quiet. I breathed. One full breath, in and out, the kind that reaches all the way down to the part of you that has been braced for something for so long that releasing the brace takes a moment to locate. There is a condition, Morgan said. I looked at him. The council notes that one of its members has been found to have committed acts contrary to PAC law and contrary to the Elder Trust. Richard Voss's position on the council is suspended pending the formal process, which begins at the PAC meeting this afternoon. He paused. Elizabeth Voss has submitted her resignation as head elder. The council has asked... He stopped. The council has asked the new Luna to advise on the selection of her replacement. I absorbed that. Elizabeth submitted her resignation, I said. This morning, Morgan confirmed, before the ruling. Before she knew the ruling. Before she knew I'd been recognized. Elizabeth Voss, who had carried a wrong choice for 6 years and had stood up at the founders' gathering and corrected it in front of her whole PAC, had submitted her resignation without knowing whether the person she'd stood beside was going to be given the title or not. That was its own kind of courage. Not the impressive kind, the quiet, costly, necessary kind. Tell her, I said, that I'd like to speak with her before I advise on anything. I'll tell her, Morgan said. He looked at Ethan. Something passed between them, the shorthand of two people who had known each other a long time and had just watched something significant happen. Then Morgan left. The library was quiet again. I stood in the middle of it. Luna of Silver Ridge PAC. The words sitting on me, not heavily, not like a weight, but like something that fit. The way something fits when you've spent 30 days learning the exact shape of it. Sophia, Ethan said. I turned. He was standing now, and the expression on his face was the one I'd been filing away in pieces for 29 days. The real version, fully present, nothing held in reserve. Say something, I said, because I'm about to start crying and I'd rather have something to respond to. He crossed the library in 4 steps, and he said, very quietly, with the certainty of someone who has known which way was north for 30 days and is finally walking toward it, "Welcome home." I did cry, for the record, briefly, efficiently, in a way that I felt was entirely proportionate to the circumstances and that Ethan handled by putting both arms around me and not saying anything about it, which was exactly right. The PAC meeting at 2 p.m. was 3 hours long. I'm not going to recount all of it. 3 hours of formal PAC proceedings would require another 30 days and a significantly larger document, but I'll tell you the parts that mattered. Richard Voss spoke. I hadn't expected that. He stood in front of the PAC and said, in the careful, measured voice of a man who had spent the night deciding that this was the last thing he could do that had any integrity left in it, that the documentation was accurate, that the transfers had occurred, that Daniel Hargrove had found exactly what he'd found, and that what had been done to Daniel was wrong. He did not offer excuses. He offered a formal accounting and a statement of responsibility, and then he sat down and didn't speak again. I don't know what to do with Richard Voss. I'm not sure anyone does yet. There is going to be a formal process and a formal consequence, and I am going to stay out of the specifics of that, because I am the Luna, not the judge, and the Book of Lunas was very clear on the difference. Thomas Hargrove spoke. Not long. Thomas was not a man who used more words than necessary, which I was discovering was a Hargrove trait that had somehow skipped Levi entirely. He said, "My brother was wronged by this PAC, and I am asking this PAC to make it right." 4 sentences. Every word necessary. Daniel Hargrove was offered the floor. He stood at the front of the room and looked at the PAC that had been his for 40 years and had taken 12 of them from him, and he said, "I want to come home." The vote to formally rescind Daniel Hargrove's forced removal and restore his standing in the PAC was unanimous. Parker presented the full financial documentation, clear, precise, formatted for a non-specialist audience exactly as I'd asked. The PAC received it the way PACs receive hard truths when they've already been told the truth once and survived it, with the grim, determined attention of people who have decided that knowing is better than not knowing, however much it costs. Levi sat next to his uncle the entire time. I presided. Not perfectly. I made 2 procedural errors that Morgan corrected quietly from the side. And there was one moment, about 90 minutes in, when the conversation between 2 founding family representatives got heated enough that I wasn't sure it was going to come back down. And I did the thing that felt instinctively right, which was to stop talking and let the silence do the work. And it did. Make the truth survivable. Not comfortable, not resolved, not wrapped up cleanly with every question answered and every wound healed. Survivable, present with it, not broken by it, able to keep going. At the end of 3 hours, the pack was intact. Fractured in the places that needed fracturing, solid in the places that mattered, alive in the complicated, imperfect 300 years of trying way of something that has decided to keep going. I called the meeting closed. The room began to empty. Mia appeared at my elbow. She'd been in the back. She'd driven up this morning when I'd sent her a 3-word text that said you should come, and stood beside me while the room cleared and said nothing for a full minute, which for Mia was an extraordinary act of restraint. Okay, she said eventually. I have approximately 47 questions. I know. Starting with, are you okay? Yes, I said. Actually, yes. And Ethan? I looked across the room, where Ethan was in conversation with Morgan and Thomas Hargrove, his sleeves rolled up, the composed surface of him present, but the warmth underneath it visible in the way it had been becoming visible, more and more, for 30 days. Also yes, I said. Mia followed my gaze. Made a sound. Sophia, she said. Mia. You moved into a werewolf estate 30 days ago, wearing a 2-year-old dress and eating crackers at midnight. And you just became the Luna of a 300-year-old pack by dismantling a 12-year financial conspiracy at the most important event of the pack year. That's accurate, I said. That's insane, she said. Also accurate. She looked at me. I looked at her. 24 years of friendship, since we were 7 years old, and she could read my face better than anyone alive. You're happy, she said. Surprised, a little, not by happiness, by the specific quality of it. Like actually, not managing it happy, actually happy. I thought about the library floor, the Book of Lunas, the red-haired 4-year-old, and the cider. Levi's coffee every morning, never wrong, Dorothy's correction. Elizabeth's late courage, Daniel coming out of the tree line, the bonfire catching. North. Yeah, I said. Actually. She grabbed me and hugged me with the full force of someone who had been holding that hug in reserve for 30 days and was now releasing it all at once. I'm going to need so many more details, she said into my shoulder. I know, I said. I'll start from the beginning. That evening, after the meeting and the conversations, and the formal processes that were going to take weeks to fully work through, I went back to the library. Old habit, 30 days in, the good kind. I put the Book of Lunas back on the 3rd shelf from the left, 2nd row, where Ethan had told me to look on the first night, ran my hand along the spine. These are the women who held us together when everything else fell apart. I thought about what no Luna had ever done. I'd been waiting for it to be something dramatic, something singular, one clear, definable act that would stand in the records as the thing. But that wasn't it. That wasn't how it worked. What no Luna had ever done was stand in the Founders' Gathering and break it open. Not because they couldn't have. Several of them, reading between the lines of the book, had found themselves in possession of hard truths that the gathering was the right place for. But because the gathering was sacred, clean, the one space that stayed safe. No Luna before me had decided that safe wasn't always what the pack needed most. That sometimes what they needed was true. I pulled out an index card. Blue, documented fact. Wrote on it. What no Luna had ever done, told the pack something it didn't want to hear, in the place it felt safest, because it needed the truth more than it needed the safety. Underneath that, it worked. I put the card inside the back cover of the Book of Lunas, for whoever read it next. Ethan found me there, because of course he did. Library, evening, the lamp on the reading table, the smell of old books and 30 days of becoming. He sat in his armchair. I sat on my floor. You put something in the book, he said. An index card, I said. Blue. Documented fact, he said. He'd learned my system sometime around day 8 without asking about it, which I'd noted and appreciated. Documented fact, I confirmed. He looked at the shelf where the book sat. The Elder Council is going to ask you to recommend a head elder replacement by end of week, he said. No pressure on timeline, it's a recommendation. They deliberate after. I know who I'm recommending, I said. He raised an eyebrow. Morgan, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Morgan is the beta. Morgan is the most scrupulously fair person in this pack, and the one most committed to the pack's well-being over his own position. And he's from a family whose loyalty was chosen rather than inherited, which means he understands what it costs and what it means, and he has never once told me what I wanted to hear when the truth was more useful. I paused. Also, he tracked my meals for 30 days without being asked, which I initially found irritating, and now understand that's just who he is. He pays attention to what people need. Ethan looked at me. He's going to say the beta role and the head elder role can't be held simultaneously, he said. Then he'll have to choose, I said, and I think he'll choose right. You've been here 30 days. 29 days of reading 300 years of records, I said. I know this pack. He held my gaze for a long moment. Something in his expression that was, by now, familiar. The warmth and the certainty, and the thing that had been building in pieces, and was now simply present. Yes, he said quietly. You do. We sat for a while. Sophia, he said. Ethan, the 30 days are up. They are. You could leave, he said. The apartment, the publishing job, the pasta and the documentary and the mustard stain, I said. The mustard stain, he agreed. You could go back to all of it. The trial is complete. The bond doesn't compel. I know, I said. It doesn't compel, it's just north. He looked at me. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying. Because of the bond? Because of the library, I said. And the crackers. And the red-haired 4-year-old who told me being human was okay. And Levi's coffee, which has never once been wrong. And Dorothy, who was wrong about me for exactly 1 week and corrected it with the efficiency of someone who has no patience for sustained error. I paused, and because I read a book 4 times and understood, the 4th time, that belonging to something is not the same as fitting in. And I belong here. That's new information, and I intend to act on it. The almost smile became the real one. Also, I said, north. Also north, he agreed. He moved from the armchair to the floor, sat beside me, back against the shelf, in the space that had become ours over 30 nights in this library. Neither of us said anything for a while. The estate was quiet around us. Somewhere Daniel Hargrove was sleeping in a guest room for the first time in 12 years. Somewhere Levi was definitely still awake, definitely talking to someone, definitely fine. Somewhere the formal processes were waiting for tomorrow and the days after, the long work of reckoning and rebuilding that was going to take more than one founders' gathering to complete. But the library was quiet. And I was the Luna of Silver Ridge Pack. And North was right here. Tell me something, I said. From the records. Something that surprised you. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you, he said simply. 30 days ago I read nothing in any record that prepared me for you. I leaned my head back against the shelf. That, I said, is going in the book. He laughed. The real one, the full version, uncontained. I stored it in the part of my brain where I keep the things that are going to matter to me for a very long time. These are the women who held us together when everything else fell apart. And the men beside them, I thought, who laughed in libraries at midnight and brought crackers without being asked, and called impossible publishing editors north without making it a demand. The fire, outside, was cold ash now, but it had burned, and tomorrow it would burn again.